Spyro Year of the Dragon was developed by Insomniac Games and released in the year 2000. It was the third in a trilogy of games featuring the lovable purple dragon. Game development in the 1990s was a whole different beast, as only 2 weeks after the studio released Ripto's Rage, they got to work on Spyro's next outing, releasing this game just 10.5 months later. It would be the final Spyro game that Insomniac worked on after having spent 5 years with the series and releasing 3 games within that time period. And let me emphasize that, 3 quality games in 5 years. Man, those were the days. For many at the studio, Year of the Dragon was their magnum opus, one last adventure with Spyro that, quote-unquote, pulled out all the stops. They wanted it to be the series' biggest and boldest adventure yet, allowing Spyro to flourish while packing in as many new ideas as possible, whether it be new modes of play or entirely different playable characters. While creating the mini-games for this title, the team cited many other games as sources of inspiration, including Tony Hawk, Scramble, Gauntlet, GoldenEye, Robotron, Virtua Cop, Mario Kart, Crash Bandicoot, Mario 64, Rampage, Ready to Rumble, and others. It isn't hard to line up these points of inspiration when looking at the varied activities in Spyro 3. And yes, I know it's not actually called Spyro 3, but I will be using it for simplicity's sake throughout this video. At the same time, new characters in Sheila, Sergeant Byrd, Bentley, and Agent 9 were introduced to break up Spyro's traditional gameplay loop. Designated as Critters, these 4 playable characters play a major role in the journey through the Forgotten Worlds. How even Sparks and Hunter are playable now. However, it isn't hard to see that all these new ideas were an admission that Insomniac was running out of ideas for Spyro, as even in interviews, it's clear the team was ready to move on to a new franchise after spending half a decade developing this series. There was an interview with PlayStation Illustrated where Insomniac CEO Ted Price was asked about future adventures with Spyro. His response was, quote, "Despite the fact that we created Spyro, this is our last outing with the diminutive purple dragon on any platform. You may be seeing him again, but we won't be the ones doing it. We're moving on to bigger and better and top secret things on the PlayStation 2. Stay tuned." End quote. His answer shows appreciation for Spyro, but also an eagerness to develop something new, to reinvigorate the studio's energy with something fresh. They jam-packed in a bunch of novel ideas and moved on to begin development on Ratchet & Clank. As a result of the new stuff, it isn't hard to feel like Spyro himself is a little overshadowed in this final outing, which for me personally makes this game not quite as memorable as the previous 2 journeys. Still, Year of the Dragon is a good time, one that still holds a lot of great memories for me and many others, and appreciating the balance between old and new is something I hope to achieve in this lengthy analysis. I'll spare you most of the introductions and explanations that I've done throughout this trilogy of videos, but before we get started, I do want to mention one thing. This video is a follow-up to my lengthy looks at Spyro the Dragon and Ripto's Rage. If you haven't watched those videos yet, I suggest starting from the beginning and working your way here because there's plenty of Spyro concepts that I talk about in those videos that I won't be rehashing here. However, if you're only interested in Spyro 3, this video can certainly be viewed standalone. And if you're enjoying this video series, please consider subscribing, it helps me out tremendously, and with that, let's take a deep dive into Spyro Year of the Dragon. Keeping with tradition, Spyro 3 opens up with a few cutscenes. In the original, each had its own little title card, but here in the Reignited trilogy, all we get is font over a black screen, which is certainly a downgrade. Regardless, both versions depict the same events. As the dragons sleep peacefully, a small band of rhino creatures sneak into their camp and begin stealing the dragon eggs. They're led by a rabbit dressed up in wizard's robes. As she attempts to flee unnoticed, she steps on Hunter's tail. He awakens and screams in pain, alerting the other dragons. Noticing the intruder, they bumble and fumble to stop her, but only Spyro manages to spark her with a bit of flame before she escapes back down the tunnel she came from. We then transition to another scene where this rabbit delivers the eggs to a blue dinosaur-looking being as she sits upon a throne. She thanks the young apprentice and implores her to start plugging up the holes so that the dragons cannot pursue them. Transitioning back to the dragon worlds, Spyro and Hunter are told that they're the only ones small enough to fit through the holes, thus making them the only ones capable of recovering the stolen eggs. With a humorous thump, Hunter and Spyro are sent into the Forgotten Worlds, their mission made quite clear. This opening scene dressing is just as good as Ripto's Rage, but in a much different way. That game's opening cutscene focused more on the characters, introducing us to some of the inhabitants that would make levels feel more alive. Insomniac had proven themselves as adept level designers in Spyro 1, and now sought to fill those worlds with creatures and challenges in Spyro 2. Here in Spyro 3, we're introduced to a few new characters as well, but the point of our mission is a lot more impactful because it's shown to us instead of us being told. In Spyro 2, Allura just tells us that Ripto is evil and he must be stopped, but here, we see Bianca and the Sorceress's plan in action. We witness as the next generation of dragons is stolen away under our noses. There's also an air of mystery about these new villains and what they have in store for us, as they don't give us much insight into their personalities, unlike Nasty Nork and Ripto. It's a solid launching off point, a call to action that feels more resonant than before. It's still mostly an excuse to set up the gameplay, but Year of the Dragon looks to tell a more well-rounded story than its predecessor, to varying degrees of success, as we will see. With that, we're set free in Sunrise Spring, the first of 4 hub worlds. Year of the Dragon sought to combine the strengths of the previous 2 games' opening levels, teaching the player the important stuff without overly tutorializing things step by step. It drops you off into a hub world just like in Spyro the Dragon, but throws a lot of the game's new concepts at the player very quickly, like in Ripto's Rage. Throughout all hub worlds, there's no enemies, which allows the player to acclimate themselves with the controls in a safe space. All of Spyro's previous moves are unlocked from the get-go, charging, flaming, rolling, gliding, and hovering, along with the moves found in Ripto's Rage, swimming, climbing, and the head bash. This is a great way of reinforcing this game as a sequel, not requiring the player to pay moneybags again to learn the same moves. In this opening area, the player is introduced to the game's 2 collectibles within just a few minutes: gems and eggs. Unlike the previous 2 games, Year of the Dragon bumps its total types of collectibles from 3 to 2. No talismans, orbs, or dragons this time. Instead, the primary collectibles are gems and eggs. Both act as progression checks. Certain levels won't unlock until you acquire enough eggs. Meanwhile, you have to pay moneybags to open up routes in certain stages and to unlock the 4 critters introduced in this game. It reinforces the collectathon nature that the series was built on, but, as we will see, many other minigames are included to replicate the ethos in Ripto's Rage of promoting completion over collection. They don't want you just walking around stages as Spyro on this adventure. Instead, they put the dragon in as many unique positions as they could, and sometimes that even includes the sideline. We run into such a moment relatively early, as after we're introduced to Bianca, who threatens us and tells us to get lost, we come face to face with a kangaroo trapped in a cage. The player hasn't seen something like this in the previous 2 games. Sure, Moneybags has appeared before, but not as a jailer. It very quickly introduces us to the game's biggest new addition: other playable characters. Sheila's placement says a lot about how Insomniac viewed their additions. She's positioned right after the Sunny Villa portal. Most players will enter that first, given Bianca stops you right beside it, but any further investigation into the hub world brings you face to face with Sheila. The team threw one traditional Spyro stage at you before pivoting to the new characters, which is interesting. Personally, I think making her appear after the Cloud Spires portal would have helped in reinforcing this as being a Spyro game first and foremost, but that's just an opinion. But the current positioning helps make clear what Ted Price and the other developers said about this game. They were simply running out of ideas for things that Spyro could do. Anyway, we'll talk more about each of the critters as we come to them. For now, let's move on. Pressing on leads to another gliding tutorial, which is good. It's a required move for fully completing the game. The cave it leads to reintroduces power-up gates. These are even easier to understand here in Spyro 3 because they're all unlocked from the start, not requiring the player to dispose of any enemies. Their function is made immediately clear without requiring much else from the player. After collecting all the gems and the egg in the cave, we find a few more reminders. Hunter informs us that we can still swim, and this Tiki Man reinforces that opening new stages is tied to collecting eggs. And it's good that many of these encounters reward the player with eggs, as we see with the gliding, swimming, and power-up gate tutorials. It uses a valuable currency to reinforce the core mechanics. There's even a hidden egg that requires the player to use the head bash, although there really isn't any good hint other than the rock's odd positioning. That might be my one knock against this tutorial. It would have been nice if, alongside of swimming, the player was also reminded that they can climb and use the head bash. Overall though, Sunrise Spring feels like a tutorial level that's pretty confident that you've played a Spyro game before. Sure, it does take the time to inform newbies of what's most important, like eggs, gems, core mechanics, and progression checks, but it still manages to feel hands-off. The training wheels feel light here. I don't think it lives up to Artisan's homeworld and especially Glimmer as tutorials, but it's still a solid opening level that conveys most of the basics. Given we're 3 games in, and many players are returning vets, this does feel nice. Instead of forcing you through one stage first, the player is immediately free to do one of 4 stages: complete Sunrise Spring, dip into Sunny Villa or Cloud Spires, or take control of a new character at Sheila's Alp. That freedom is appreciated after a first run, so credit where credit is due. As for this video, I'm going to use that freedom to unlock each new playable character before doing any other stages in each hub world. So you know what that means, time for Spyro to take a back seat. Sheila's Alp is the first manifestation of what Ted Price said in the interview with PlayStation Illustrated. Quote, "Instead of burdening Spyro with a bunch of extra moves, we wanted players to experience new control schemes and introduce new faces. The best way to do this was through the critters, and since all 4 are so different, we believe that we created a much greater variety of gameplay by using them versus sticking with Spyro." End quote. To put it short, the team at Insomniac was running out of new ideas for what to do with the purple dragon. His simple design would have to be compromised to take on new abilities like dropping bombs, double jumping, and shooting. Instead of forcing him into costumes or altering his simple look, they opted to create the critters. I love that terminology, by the way. That's actually their official name, the critters. Anyway, unlocking Sheila brings us face to face with Moneybags. He comments on our previous adventure in Avalar before we pay him to release Sheila. He will once again be showing up throughout this game, so introducing the player to him quickly was smart, just like in Ripto's Rage. The introduction between Spyro and Sheila provides an interesting lore dump about the Forgotten Worlds. Dragons used to live here, but once they left, all the magic left with them. This is used to explain why some of the level's portals aren't open. There aren't enough dragons present to power them. However, by recovering eggs and witnessing them hatch, dragons are restored to the lands, and their magic along with them, thus opening up the gateways. It's a nice in-universe explanation for why we can't get into some of the stages quite yet. Sheila herself has seen the most drastic changes here in the Reignited trilogy, at least to her looks, but we'll talk about that more later. For now, this moment is the first time in the series in which the player was controlling a character other than Spyro. I remember being hesitant as a kid, but ultimately on board with the idea, as the variety Price talked about was felt rather quickly. Sheila, like the other critters, has her own identity that harmonizes her mechanics within her design. She's a kangaroo, a creature with strong legs for jumping, so thus a natural fit for platforming. Her signature move is a double jump featuring 2 variants. She can perform an air hop, which is a traditional double jump, but also a version that gives her a massive boost into the sky. Her combat moves include a kick and an overhead slam, similar to Spyro's head bash. Together, these mechanics are introduced in a pretty simple level, first allowing the player to familiarize themselves with the double jump variations before introducing combat. The cave system breaks up the visuals of the level and includes a few nice offshoots that contain gems only discoverable if the player uses the highest jump. But the most interesting part of the stage comes at the end when the player is thrown into an area with mushroom houses. Infinite Rhinox will spawn from them, forcing the player to crush the houses with the overhead slam. It can make for a pretty intense combat section early in the game relative to Spyro standards, but it's nothing too crazy. Afterwards, there's a few more high up areas to reach, cementing how Sheila's mechanics can alter the level design. You remember that bouncy power-up gate in Colossus? Yeah, Sheila is the walking embodiment of that. Overall, I think Sheila was the smartest critter to introduce first, because she's relatively close to Spyro mechanically. Later critters will diversify the gameplay a lot more, so going with a character who double jumps as her primary mechanic was well played, given Spyro's jump and glide is already so familiar to the player. This is a fun and simple level that gets the player on board with playing as someone other than Spyro. We skipped past it earlier, but Sunny Villa is a fantastic level that outlines what the player can expect from stages here in Year of the Dragon. Collection through exploration was the theme of Spyro the Dragon's gameplay, while the developer shifted towards completion in Ripto's Rage. I'd argue that Year of the Dragon does a great job of harmonizing these two ideas. It still includes plenty of alternate gameplay styles that reinforces completion, while also bringing more of that natural exploration back from the first game. So let's see how it's done. Just like in previous installments, the game smartly lets the player have a safe space in the opening moments of the level, providing enemy fodder that won't fight back against you. It allows you to get familiar with charge and flame attacks, while also including some cool animations that make these Rhinox feel more alive than the enemies in the previous 2 games. But what really impresses is the second part of the stage, featuring the buildings. There's layers to this section. The ground floor introduces a new enemy type, and with a proper explanation from the fairy, you learn that big enemies have to be flamed to be defeated. The foundation of the buildings creates alleyways that house gems, forcing the player through them like a simple maze to get them all. And if you want, you're free to just press on to the next part of the level from here, but smart enemy, egg, and gem placement is used to lure the player upwards. The game's primary collectible, the egg, catches your eye immediately. It's just sitting on the first stair. You hop up, collect it, and while you're here, why not see what else resides on the second layer? This leads to more gems, enemies, and a few secret areas. The first is an egg way off in the distance, one you would have never noticed without taking the time to explore. It's more than just a simple glide though, you have to platform over to it using the pillars and hover move. Remember, this is the first real stage of the game, at least the first intended one, and they're already throwing this at you. It's incredible. It's a clear sign that the level design in Year of the Dragon will be elevated in challenge compared to the previous 2 games, at least a little bit. It's going to force you to take notice of your surroundings if you want to get everything. There's also a weird portal, but more on that in a minute. Continuing onward, we get a humorous scene where a Rhinox chases a giant chicken. Turning the corner, we find out what happened as it wields a mighty meaty drumstick against us. It's a nice detail that makes these enemies feel a tad more interesting than what we saw before. After that, we save the mayor, who strangely enough runs into the exit portal, something we did not see in Spyro 2. But before we can worry about that, a hallway beckons. Venturing towards it brings us to a mysterious purple portal like the one we saw earlier. Going in reveals a giant new part of the level. Insomniac wanted the levels to be a lot bigger here in their final game, but the limitations of the PlayStation 1 forced them to create separate areas within each stage as to not overtax the console. I always wish the areas were one big coherent stage, but dividing them up like this certainly eased the burden on the level designers. Instead of forcing them to do mental gymnastics to get everything to line up perfectly, they were free to build the minigames the way they wanted, using only the stage's aesthetics and vibes instead of having to make them feel geographically real. The result is bigger levels that take longer to complete, but ones that lose out on continuity as a consequence, although I think the exchange is worth it. The one we find first is a massive skate park, informing us immediately of the first major point of inspiration for designing minigames this time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The team was not hesitant about borrowing ideas from other popular games, as was made abundantly clear in that interview from earlier. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had released in September of 1999, just 2 months before Year of the Dragon began development. Its popularity on the console did not go unnoticed by Insomniac, and with the team running out of ideas for Spyro, it made sense to pivot towards adapting trendy gameplay styles. Sometimes the biggest inspirations don't come from inner creativity, but instead by seeing what works for others. Anyway, the skate mechanics are pretty decent here, considering the team was implementing them for the first time. Spyro can perform tricks on the halfpipe, launch off of ramps, and reach new speed milestones. In this one, you have to catch lizards to earn eggs. The first time, you're free to take as much time as you need, learning the controls as you play. Once you get a grip on them, Hunter asks you to do the same challenge again, but with stipulations, in the form of time restraints. You can't fall off the board, and you have to complete it within 3 minutes. From an overall perspective, it feels like an evolution of the minigames in Ripto's Rage. I love the conciseness of the second title's minigames more, but it's hard to not see how Year of the Dragon pushed the boundaries really far. Skateboarding isn't using Spyro's base abilities and tweaking them a little bit to create some new minigame. It is its own system with different mechanics completely. It's a whole different beast. You're not just going around using the head bash to break up Earth Shapers to get an orb. No, this is a whole different beast. They had to build something completely new to make this function. It just goes beyond what Spyro is normally capable of, and therefore feels like an awesome new addition to the series. And they took that overall belief of extending Spyro past his usual abilities very far in this game. Hell, the fact that they included this skateboarding system in the first intended stage makes me think the team was really proud of what they had constructed to push Spyro's gameplay further down the evolutionary path. Smartly, the other gate here is locked unless the player has already rescued Sheila. If you haven't, you can't get into this part of the stage. It informs players that the critters have challenges outside of their respective stages. A full completionist run will use all their abilities across many levels. This one sees Sheila using her double jump to ascend a massive tower. Just like in the main part of Sunny Villa, there's a few hidden alcoves for the player to find. Many gems can be left uncollected unless the player is really paying attention to the level design, looking for areas that aren't part of the critical path. Again, it's exploration and completion harmonizing smoothly. Sunny Villa ends up being a marvelous stage as a result, one that shows a lot of confidence in how Insomniac wanted to blend traditional Spyro gameplay with a ton of new ideas while also increasing the challenge for returning series veterans. It's a masterclass in that regard. The question then becomes, was Insomniac able to maintain this high bar of excellence across the game's many, many levels? But as we return to Sunrise Spring, a cutscene is triggered. It shows Spyro and Hunter moving throughout the world, silently being watched by Bianca. Hunter, the goof that he is, trips and the apprentice can't help but to crack a laugh. This alerts them to her position, and funny enough, this duo still believes she is the evil sorceress at this point. It makes sense though, they haven't gotten any proper introductions. Anyway, Spyro chases her off, and Hunter mentions that he finds Bianca to be kinda cute, a sign of things to come. Year of the Dragon looks to have a little more character work than Ripto's Rage did, and includes a plot that reflects that. It's nothing deep, but it's another gradual step. Ripto's Rage had a bunch of new characters, but ultimately the plot was get out there and stop Ripto. Here, it's just a bit more elevated, and this is the first sign of that. Cloud Spires is like the town square or Colossus equivalent here in the third game, in the sense that it's the first mission that requires you to use your full gliding repertoire to reach the end of the main path. Again, it's always good to include this early, as it is a core skill to finishing the game, whether you're going for full completion or not. There's even a few tutorial reminders throughout the stage. It also reinforces the approach to level layout found in Sunny Villa. There's a critical main path, but also a series of alcoves and semi-hidden areas to find. They do the old memory trick with them, tantalizing you with gems that are just out of reach, only accessible after returning later. The trick is remembering where you saw them so that you can return after activating the bellows, which is the objective that's needed to be completed to get the stage's main egg. Once you do, you can find another path above where you first traveled. It guides you along with gems while dodging fire, and it all leads to another egg. This is one of my favorite elements about exploring in Spyro 3, these hidden eggs. In Ripto's Rage, only the hub worlds contained random orbs that were just laying around for you to grab. That's not the case here. Seemingly every level has an egg that doesn't require you to complete a task from a character to receive. You just have to find it. It helps bring that exploration emphasis back from Spyro's original outing. Anyway, while we're still early in the game, I wanted to talk about something else that Year the Dragon borrows from Spyro the Dragon. Just like in the first game, collecting every gem means directly beating every single guard. In Ripto's Rage, defeating enemies help turn the power-up gates on, allowing you to complete other challenges. It forced combat into the equation if you wanted to go for full completion because many orb challenges were tied to those power-up gates. It makes sense given the developer's intent was for players to fully complete each stage. I think it was a great fit for that game, giving an extrinsic reason to engage with combat outside of the internal satisfaction from flaming or charging enemies. However, there's nothing wrong with the approach in Spyro 1 or 3 as the end result is the same. The approach is more relaxed in Year of the Dragon as it aims to blend exploration, collection, and completion as the player sees fit. The new playable characters and extremely varied minigames makes me think that the developers were saying, do what feels fun to you. There's a lot here. Find something you like and do those challenges to earn the eggs you need to complete the game. Full completion is still an option, but normal progression is more relaxed, owed to the quantity of ways to get eggs. This is reflected in the minigames where power-up gates no longer require you to defeat a certain number of enemies to turn them on. You can complete them without killing a single foe, so instead, to keep combat as a rewarded part of the gameplay loop, enemies once again drop gems. This continues to provide both an intrinsic and extrinsic reward while making sure enemies don't go ignored. It's a subtle change, but one that reflects the developer's intentions for what kind of experience they wanted the players to have. As for our minigames in this stage, we have the Sunseed and Weather Cloud challenges. I really like the weather theme being brought into this stage. It allows it to be more than just a cloud level. You have the bellows that represent wind, while also including minigames where you create a new sun and wake up a cloud to cause it to rain. The sun seeds require you to chase after them and be flamed before they pass out, while the weather cloud needs to be saved from spirits using a flight power-up gate. Both are simple early game challenges that allow the player to familiarize themselves with more traditional tasks like the ones found in Ripto's Rage. In other words, you won't find a vehicle or some skateboard here. No, it's just good old-fashioned Spyro moves to get the job done. It's nice to see that just because the team was taking a lot of inspiration from other titles while making minigames, they didn't forget their bread and butter. Molten Crater feels like a response to the question I asked at the end of the Sunny Villa section. Could Insomniac maintain the excellent level design over the entire game? To me, levels like Molten Crater say, no they could not. But not from a lack of passion or interest, but instead because of time constraints. Remember, this game was only allotted 10.5 months to be developed. Sure, they had a lot of experience at this point, but that's still not a lot of time. Either way, the result is the inclusion of stages like Molten Crater, which don't feel as fleshed out as they otherwise could be. There's nothing inherently wrong with the stage, but its main path is extremely short, a simple loop without many offshoots at all. In fact, all you get in regards to that is this poorly hidden egg and a few patches of grass within the Tiki Lounge walls. At least the shot of the magma is gorgeous, a benefit afforded by this remake. Outside of that, the only other point of differentiation here in the main section is the chest that requires a key to open, something we haven't seen since Spyro 1. It's cool that they brought this back, and this first one is pretty inoffensive. Following the gems in the central area reveals the key, and it's easy enough to get back to the chest after the shortcut opens. However, that isn't the only thing returning from the OG here in Molten Crater. In one of the portals we find a supercharged track that's infested with a couple of egg thieves. To be fair, there was one in Cloud Spires too, but I dealt with him in a rather unconventional way. Anyway, it's awesome to see these guys return. It's such a natural fit considering eggs are the primary collectible. It really makes me wonder if they brought these guys back simply because eggs are the primary collectible in Spyro 3, or if eggs were made the primary collectible just to bring these dudes back. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg. Probably the former in this case, but either way, it's a match made in heaven. The challenge itself isn't too bad, although it is weird to be running on a supercharged pathway that isn't functioning. Regardless, the second round is definitely a step up, as leaping between gaps becomes almost necessary to catch the little turd. It's a nice and nostalgic challenge. With that, I've completed everything available in Molten Crater, considering I can't get any further yet without first unlocking Sergeant Byrd. Players can't do that on a first run through the game, which informs you that, once again, backtracking will be a mandatory part of a completionist run. We'll talk more about that later though. For now, let's leave this rather forgettable stage. Up next is Seashell Shore, a stage that feels like an amalgamation of two levels in Ripto's Rage, Sunny Beach and Aquaria Towers. You have a swimming section as well as a beachy area, and thus the comparison. For me, this is part of the reason I have a much harder time remembering all the levels in Year of the Dragon compared to Ripto's Rage. Some of them feel like retreads. Molten Crater sorta gives Magma Cone vibes, and now this. There's still plenty of creative levels in Spyro 3, but some of them were certainly starting to feel repetitive, reinforcing that it was time for Insomniac to move on. Anyway, Seashell Shore isn't a bad stage, most notably because it feels like an elevation in difficulty. You have enemies underwater who must be disposed of without using your flame attack, meanwhile, some of the land ho enemies function in new ways. The tinier enemies get a protective shell, meaning players have to attack them twice before they're finished off. And the bigger enemies throw barrels at you within confined spaces, forcing you to platform a tiny bit to reach them. It's nothing crazy, but certainly a minor step up. However, what really jumps out to me is that we've now completed 4 stages in a row that all feature looping level design. In Sunny Villa, Cloud Spires, Molten Crater, and Seashell Shore, the main pathway loops back on itself, leading the player back to the start of the stage. And spoiler alert, about every single level within this game will do just that. At least the ones where you play as Spyro, excluding speedways and bosses for obvious reasons. It's an interesting approach to level design, but there's a few different ways that you can look at it. On one hand, I find it to be a little disappointing as every stage ends up feeling like a big circle. Sure, the biomes are different, but without the layout variation, it ends up feeling like many of the stages see you moving in the same exact pattern. Again, there is variation, like the swimming here, or the gliding in Enchanted Towers, but for me, it just isn't enough to escape the feeling that every level is in some core way the same. That repeated motion makes some of the stages run together despite the different aesthetics, and that's one of a few reasons for why I prefer Spyro 1 and 2 a little bit more. However, when looking at the other side of things, it's clear why Insomniac made this design choice. We know Ripto's Rage was all about completion. The developers wanted the player to see and do everything. However, varying skill levels and playstyles meant that not everyone was going to do every single thing in a stage before leaving it. That means if they wanted to finish up everything after defeating Ripto, they'd have to return to stages. Because not every level was looping, this meant retreading the stage again, often doing the same talisman challenges over just to reach areas that they were missing gems or orbs in. Think of things like using the hippos to open the doors in Shady Oasis, or pushing buttons to release water in Aquaria Towers. That could be aggravating and time-consuming for players, and Year of the Dragon sought to reconcile this for completionists. The result is this looping level design where the ending always circles back to the beginning. These shortcuts stay open too, meaning players can often go backwards to the stage to reach minigames they wanted to come back to later. It's a concession for completionist-oriented players. You're free to feel one way or another about this, but for me, I don't think the trade-off was worth it. I'd rather backtrack through varied stages if it meant the first run through it didn't feel identical to almost every other level. To make a long story short, Year of the Dragon could have used a few stages like Stone Hill, Treetops, or Fracture Hills, wide open areas that the player is free to explore at their leisure. The minigames in this stage are alright. Sheila's challenge sees us stomping on a bunch of Reignited turrets. It feels a lot easier nowadays, but I think that's just due to me being an adult, not because it's easier in Reignited. The turret section against Bluto is one of many vehicle minigames, but it's really not that bad here either, although he's not nearly as imposing as he was back in the original version. Still, it's fun to swim around his arena to get all the gems. I love that these challenge rooms weren't immune to containing gems. It gives you something else to do when you're in them. And finally, there's the swimming tunnel. Out of all the minigame concepts within this series, this one has to be amongst the lowest for me. These are extremely trial and error, seeing many restarts until you learn the proper route through them to reach the egg. However, I will admit embarrassingly that it took me until this playthrough to realize you don't have to hold the charge button through this tunnel. You'll automatically be moving at top speed. Overall, Seashell Shore is okay, but it's certainly one of the levels that lacks its own identity. Hell, they even copied the move from Aquaria Towers, where you swim upward to reach another area and more challenges. Upon returning from this world, we're teleported to the hot air balloon, another great callback to Spyro 1. Chatting with the NPCs, it's clear what we are meant to do. Hop on this thing and go to the next hub world. And as a quick side note, it's cool that each of them has their own unique dialogue. It gives each of the NPCs a bit more personality. I love that detail. However, before we get to Midday Gardens, we have a whole lot more to complete first. The first of those levels would be Mushroom Speedway, our first flight mission in the game. These returned from Spyro 1 and 2, and it's been impressive to see how each of the games have evolved this concept. The original game had only the time challenge, the second game introduced hunter challenges, and now this final title incorporates a racing minigame. This track is one of the best in the series, at least relevant to its position in the game. This is the first one the player can complete in Year of the Dragon, so it's of course rather simple. The biggest change in my mind though is that it doesn't start immediately when you enter the stage. Instead, Sparks will now talk to you, inform you of the multiple challenges, and even give a tip on how to complete them successfully. This gives new or unfamiliar players at least some idea of what to expect instead of just being thrown right in, and that's appreciated. Time attack has seen a slight change, as now collecting objects doesn't reward you more time, instead you get a higher amount of time to complete the challenge, but have to finish it before time expires. Hilariously, just like while playing hockey in Ripto's Rage, I had another instance of finishing a job with 1/10 of a second remaining. And you know, I'm kinda impressed with myself for pulling this off twice, although it's really just a sign of poor play by me. Anyway, next up is a race, which is new for the series. These are very demanding, even here in the first instance. There's a set path for you to follow, but you won't get first place unless you utilize every single speed boost and play nearly flawlessly, avoiding collisions, and taking corners tight. It's a rather steep asking point of the player this early in the adventure, although difficulty in Year of the Dragon differs a lot here in the remake compared to the original game. More on that later. The race takes a few tries, but it isn't too hard for adults. And finally, returning from Ripto's Rage are hidden hunter missions where you find him in the racetrack and talk to him to unlock a new challenge. This one involves blowing up flying saucers, an asset most likely carried over from Metropolis. It isn't too hard as long as you keep an eye out for the projectiles that they shoot. Interestingly enough, you actually play as Hunter this time instead of controlling Spyro, another instance of taking you out of the Purple Dragon's shoes. Feet. Regardless, all of these challenges reward you with an egg, which makes these speedways feel more fleshed out. Not only is there gems to grab, but now there's also eggs included, the main collectible of the game, instead of just one orb. Mushroom Speedway is a nice improvement over the previous game speedways, while still being a mostly gentle introduction to new players. As we depart for the next hub world, we're intercepted by a cutscene and a boss fight. We watch as the Sorceress and Bianca share a conversation, and important one for creating a distinction between their personalities. The big blue alligator is cruel, vile, and pure evil, while Bianca shows signs of good. She doesn't want to kill Spyro and Hunter, but feeling powerless, she whips up a monster to take them down at the behest of her leader. This is just an idea in my head, but I always thought the fact that she turned the Rhynoc into a bunny at first was a sign of her true nature, not wanting to cause harm. But with the monster established, we arrive in Buzz's dungeon. I'll just be straight up, I think the bosses are a step back from the ones we got in Ripto's Rage. Their mechanical complexity is about the same, but the ones found here lack the personality that Crush, Gulp, and Ripto had. They feel like generic monsters, whereas the goofy interactions with the former trio ascribe personalities to each, even the ones that couldn't talk. You got that idiot henchman vibe from both Gulp and Crush, which was cool. Buzz here lacks all of that, he's just an evil toothy frog. Bash him into the lava a few times and avoid his chase downs to win the day. Another reason I think the boss fights aren't as good is because their arenas lack a sense of belonging in this world. They all appear as evil side pocket realms with lava and darkness, unlike anything we see while exploring the normal stages. Boss fights in Ripto's Rage, and even Spyro 1, felt like actual places that belonged, each having their own physical portals or entrances in the world certainly helped accomplish that. Here, we're just soaring through the skies before landing in some hellhole for some unknown reason. It lacks that spatial element that would make these arenas feel like a connected part of the Forgotten Realms. After the boss fight, we arrive in Midday Gardens, where Bianca's gentle nature is reinforced. She tries to put on a tough act, but even through that, she makes it clear that she's trying to drive Spyro and Hunter off for their own good. She's afraid of the Sorceress and is starting to lose faith in her as a leader. Before we venture into Midday Gardens, we first must return to Sunrise Springs to tackle our first Sparks level. These are top-down, twin-stick shooter levels that see you playing as the Dragonfly, not that anyone was clamoring to do so, but it's a novel idea at the very least. This first stage is a solid introduction to this gameplay system, as Zoe the Fairy gives you a good tutorial before you're set free in the stage proper. These involve collecting a bunch of gems and using keys to solve puzzles, all while defeating enemies using your normal blaster and power-ups you find scattered throughout. It's pretty simple here, and I do love that you just run into the boss without a proper warning. It's like an oh shit moment that you don't necessarily see coming. Completing each of these stages gives Sparks a boost. Here in Crawdad Farms, after rescuing the egg, Sparks is given an increased area of effect in regards to his gem collection ability. In other words, he'll travel farther distances to pick up gems for you. It's a nice bonus. Sparks is an all-star, a perfect companion for Spyro, and implemented extremely well. It's something I talked about in my first video, so I won't rehash it here, but yeah, Sparks is great. As we enter our second hub world, I wanted to say if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. It greatly helps me out as I continue pushing to make the channel grow. Thank you for the support. I'm saying that because I know you subbed. Yeah, I see you staring at the screen. I know you already clicked that subscribe button, so thank you. Anywho, with all those stages wrapped up, we finally arrived in the second homeworld, Midday Gardens. If I'm honest, this is my least enjoyed of the hub worlds in Spyro 3, but that's due to the vibes. They just aren't as stellar here, at least to me. What I can't deny though is that it's one of, if not the best designed hub world, for communicating new ideas to the player. It all starts in the travel room, which has been enhanced. They added little portraits to the wall, showing off the NPCs found in each of the stages here. It's a nice addition that would have been welcome in every travel room. It's like a preview of what's to come. For some reason, it only exists in Midday Gardens. Just like the other hub worlds, Midday Gardens has your run-of-the-mill, low-stakes collection. Find the hidden eggs, grab all the gems, and even chase down a thief, which is a nice touch. However, I want to get back to what I just mentioned, how strong this stage is for conveying new ideas to the player. Many new mechanics were introduced in Ripto's Rage: swimming, climbing, spitting, power-up gates, and more, iconic staples to Spyro's capabilities. All of these return in Year of the Dragon. In fact, some stages are completely built around them once again. In Ripto's Rage, Aquaria Towers was the premier swimming level, while Magma Cone was the climbing level. While Spyro 3 doesn't build its stages around these mechanics quite as heavily, they're still sprinkled in. Many of these are found in the Midday Garden levels: spitting in Enchanted Towers, sliding on ice in Icy Peak, climbing in Spooky Swamp, and the power-up gate of Bamboo Terrace. Therefore, Midday Gardens is brilliant because the lead up to each of these stages' portals includes the mechanic that the stage will feature. For example, you have to use a spit rock to open the portal to Enchanted Towers. You have to slide on ice to reach Icy Peak. You have to climb up to the Spooky Swamp portal, and the same power-up gate you find in Bamboo Terrace is placed right outside of the portal, given purpose through another egg challenge. These are subtle things that the player might not even pick up on, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It's the game easing you into the stage you're about to enter, creating awesome transitions with actual mechanical purpose. It's awesome stuff. Besides that though, Midday Gardens does feel a little bit hollow to me. All the hub worlds in Year of the Dragon are built around times of the day: morning, midday, evening, and night. Let's be real, out of these four categories, how many of us are saying that the middle of the day is our favorite time of the day? There's morning people, there's night owls, but there's not too many afternoon enjoyers. If you are, more power to you, but I think that bias has crept in on me, making Midday Gardens my least enjoyed hub world in this game. However, it does give us one special treat, a treat that endures here in the Reignited trilogy. You can create a Hunter Paradox. By lining up on this ledge outside of Sergeant Byrd's podium, you can see the dumb cheetah in two places at once. It's a funny little moment that probably wasn't intended, but it's just cool it exists. It's an awesome Easter egg. Honestly, Sergeant Byrd's base is probably my least favorite level in the entire original trilogy. Inevitably, when I make a ranking video someday, we'll find out for sure, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Reuniting with Moneybags allows us to free up the Penguin Soldier. Is that copyright infringement? I guess not. Bro had a sword, this dude has rocket launchers. Sergeant Byrd himself does have a great personality. He toes a nice line between goofy and charming, and his French hummingbird band of brothers makes things all the better. I love the little detail that, without Byrd there, the Rhinox managed to capture their entire fortress in 15 minutes. These characters are some of the most charming inhabitants in the series. I'll give them that. However, Sergeant Byrd himself is a nightmare to control. Okay, it's not that bad, but it is incredibly cumbersome. It's all tied to his flight controls. First of all, you aren't even told that his platforming sections revolve around flight, so if you don't experiment on your own, no one's going to tell you how to escape the first room. I don't love that, especially considering the game already took the time to explain Sheila's controls back in her level. The consistency would be nice. However, the real problem is owed to the controls themselves. You're asked to keep Byrd's flight up by constantly mashing the X button using your right hand, but you also have to use that hand to control the right stick to move the camera. You get into these awkward hand movements where you shuffle back and forth between camera and X to fly. Not to mention, you can't move the camera in a full 360 degrees while flying. It's just awkward. I don't even remember it being this bad in the original release, but I can't confirm that without replaying it. If that's true though, this is a major downgrade in Reignited. It's easy enough to get through the stage if you aren't going for everything. You won't notice the poor controls quite as much, as you can zip through the mandatory bits to reach the end. However, when you have to knock down every air balloon container, find every Rhinoc, and carry around bombs to blow up gem containers, that's when you start to feel it. Spyro has always felt buttery smooth to play, and this feels jank in comparison. It ends up making the stage feel tedious, carried by the awesome characters alone. I will give it props in one area though, the secret tunnel. Collecting every gem and egg means remembering this metal crate sitting in the first third of the level. To unlock it, you have to drop a bomb on it, but doing so blows up the floor beneath it as well, giving you access to the final hummingbird to get the last egg. It's a nice touch, and for some reason, I always forget it exists, which makes for a cool moment when revisiting this stage. Besides this, the rest of the level focuses on verticality since Sergeant Byrd specializes in moving on that axis. It's fine, nothing special. There's a few nooks and crannies to get into, but a few more hidden caves, tucked up high or down low, would have added to the stage's appeal. Next we come to Icy Peak, and before we get into it proper, can I just say, I think one of the biggest reasons for why Spyro 2's worlds feel more alive than Spyro 3's is the naming convention of the latter. Stages in Ripto's Rage felt like proper names of places: Colossus, Glimmer, Zephyr, Scorch. Sure, they had a few less creative ones like Sunny Beach and Shady Oasis, but on the whole, most of them felt mysterious as you entered them. You weren't sure entirely what to expect. In Year of the Dragon, that's completely different. Every stage name feels generic, like a basic description of the level's geographical makeup. Icy Peak is a great example, but it isn't the only one. There's Sunny Villa, Molten Crater, Crystal Islands, and Desert Ruins, amongst others. This more direct naming convention worked well in the desolate and atmospheric worlds of Spyro 1. But once you introduce level-specific NPCs into the world, you need names that reflect civilization, not geography. It makes many of the Year of the Dragon worlds feel at odds, settled regions that are named as if they're descriptions for the landmass. It's like if you lived in a town tucked away in the hills and it was just called Grassy Hills. It's boring, it's a small detail, but man, these names are just not that creative. It's a shame it's that way here in Icy Peak because this is an awesome level. There's the standard main path, but so many looping twists and turns on the perimeter, but finding those optional paths isn't always easy. You have to not only spend time looking for them, thinking about the level geometry and your limitations, but also taking advantage of the cannons to expose new routes. A great example of this is the gems hidden underneath the ice. You can see treasure down there, so clearly there must be a way in. Observing your environment, you can notice a ledge and a weaker part of the ice. By finding a nearby pathway, you can access the balcony and head smash straight down to clear the path. You have to consider Spyro's limitations, that he can't jump while on ice, and then think about his total moveset, remembering the head bash, and then putting all the pieces together while locating the route. Smartly, there's even a head bash crate placed in this stage to remind you that you have this ability. It's awesome stuff, and it's just one of a few times the stage does this. 100% completion in Icy Peak is no easy feat either, as you have to think hard to find every gem. Buzzards flying in the sky must be shot down to collect their gems, and there's some hard to detect ones while running down the egg thieves. It's easier in Reignited though because right from the start, Sparks' Gem Finder ability is unlocked. Normally, you wouldn't get it until you complete the second Spark stage. It's such a helpful tool. In fact, it's so helpful that without it, I probably would have left Icy Peak without fully completing it had I not had this ability. What can I say, Reignited is a lot easier in some ways. The egg challenges aren't bad either. Racing down the thieves is surprisingly easier here in Icy Peak than in Molten Crater. I guess they thought the branching paths and bottomless gaps would make it harder, but it really isn't. Meanwhile, protecting the ballerina dancer from the hockey players is a good time. It's simple, but that's okay. Any harder and it would have felt trial and error like. One little thing I like though is that the dancer says a judge threw an egg instead of a rose. Talking to Moneybags, he says he was one of the judges. I always like to think it was him that threw the egg. Regardless, I think Icy Peak is an above average stage. It's pretty good. The ice and cannon mechanics are fun additions, finding everything is a real challenge, and the enemies are a step up in difficulty once more. The ice can make it difficult to reflect these TNT runners, and the snowball gun wielding Rhinox shoot 3 times instead of once. I guess my biggest nitpick here in Reignited is a topic I'll speak more on later, the loss of details. The ice here in Icy Peak looks so darn ugly compared to the original, and the TNT runners don't have their maniacal laugh anymore. It's a real shame. As we leave the stage and return to Midday Gardens, we get another cutscene. Spyro and Hunter watch as Bianca practices her magic, clearly wanting to get better after her screw up in front of the Sorceress. She accidentally turns a rabbit into a monster. By the way, I love that the fodder of this stage are these rabbits, and that it shows up in the cutscenes. It's a nice bit of continuity. Anyway, the creature goes rogue and attacks Bianca. Hunter is quick to act, saying they should help, and eventually showing some competency for once by tackling the beast and freeing Bianca after it swallows her whole. Spyro remains antagonistic towards her, and that feeling is kept mutual between the two. But it's clear Hunter has a soft spot for her, something that may cause more trouble as the adventure continues. Next, let's head into Enchanted Towers. As a kid, I would have told you this was my favorite level in the entire game for one specific reason: the skate park, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Even with the nostalgia aside, Enchanted Towers has an aura in Year of the Dragon, at least in how it's designed. Well, the level that is. The new look of the inhabitants here is probably the worst redesign in the entire updated trilogy. Holy crap, hipsters with coffee cups? Absolutely not, no thank you. But the level design is pretty good. Sure, it's a loop like many of the other stages, but it does 2 things that set it apart. One, it emphasizes the spitting mechanic, a new move Spyro got in Ripto's Rage, but never got a level of its own in. And 2, the entire stage is also explorable by Sergeant Byrd. Spitting is a bit of an awkward mechanic. Spyro can find lava rocks laying on the ground, which he can scoop up into his mouth and then shoot them back out as projectiles that kill enemies. This shooting can be done in a free aim mode or while using the look around mechanic for targeting purposes. Here in Enchanted Towers, there's plenty of these fire-spitting flying frog things that can be defeated most easily by spitting rocks. It gives a purpose to the mechanic, and while it would help if the level invested further into it by including necessary switches like the one used to open the stage portal, it's at least nice to see a stage feature it heavily. However, the real star of the show is Sergeant Byrd's segment, something you might not expect me to say after clearing out his base. Unlike the base, which has a lot of cramped rooms and ledges, Enchanted Towers is wide open, allowing you to soar the skies with ease. If enemies give you a hard time, you can now snipe them out of existence using Byrd's heat-seeking missiles. It's just a shame that his challenge is a recycled one, blowing up the lizards to recover bones for the dancing skeleton. Heck, even the caveman is back. I can't say this feels like an Easter egg. It's pulled right out of Spyro 2 without any continuity reasons. He's just here because the developers were short on time making this game, so why not recycle a few older ideas, models, and concepts? It's not like this is a stage where it feels like the caveman might actually belong, no matter how much you want to stretch your imagination. That aside though, it's still an awesome segment because of how Sergeant Byrd's different playstyle allows you to see the stage in a brand new way. I also love that blowing up the statue of the Sorceress is a critical part of the level's progression, but once it's done, it reveals a hidden pathway to the next side room, the skate park. Look, I'm biased, but I absolutely adore this area. When I was a kid, I only had Year of the Dragon at my dad's house, and I was only there a few days each month. Whenever I'd go over, one of my favorite things to do was boot up this game, go to the skate park, and pull off trick after trick just trying to get Spyro to spin a few extra times. I loved it, and I still do. I really have no complaints. I think it's an awesome skate park, and Smoking Hunter during the Egg Challenge is still one of my personal favorite things to do in all of Spyro. So overall, Enchanted Towers is great. Oh wait, you might be thinking, what about the Wolf Challenge where you rescue Farley? Well, yeah, that exists too. It's fine, but it's a bit finicky, especially here in Reignited. Farley won't always follow you or chase the ball, which can make this challenge annoying. Despite this trilogy coming out nearly 8 years ago, it still hasn't been fully fixed. It remains an enduring blemish on the remake of Year of the Dragon. It's no secret that, at launch, it was clear to many players that Year of the Dragon wasn't as fine-tuned as the remakes of Spyro 2 and especially Spyro 1. Hell, if you take the time to look at Spyro 1 footage with Spyro 2 and 3, it's clear just the visuals alone look so much better in the first game. What happened was Toys for Bob ran out of time, as a hard deadline had been placed on the project. Activision wanted this game out in time for Spyro's 20th anniversary, and with the clock ticking, they turned to Sanzaru Games to develop Year of the Dragon with just a little oversight from Toys for Bob. And if Sanzaru Games gives you flashbacks to war times, I don't blame you. With them at the helm of this third remake, it suffered a little bit, as a completely different team went to work. All things considered, it's amazing the games turned out as aesthetically harmonious as they did, and I will admit, I never had many problems with this game at launch. However, many did. There were reports of invisible gems, glitched out egg thieves, and players getting stuck in certain areas. This challenge with Farley always reminds me of that time because it's very easy for his ball to glitch out, even producing a weird noise in the audio files if it gets stuck like it did on my playthrough. The bugs were noticeable and some still endure to this day. However, it's hard not to point the final blame at Activision despite my enduring disdain for Sanzaru after they butchered Sly Cooper. By sticking so harshly to the deadline, they forced another company to come in late and create this entire game while being a completely different studio than the original team. Again, it's amazing that the three games are as consistent as they are considering that division. It makes me think Toys for Bob and Sanzaru had a really solid line of communication and a willingness to share ideas and tools like the Spyroscope I talked about in the first video. What a weird project the Reignited trilogy must have been to work on. But it is a shame that Year of the Dragon didn't get quite the same amount of polish as the first two games, something that many fans lament to this day, especially those that consider Spyro 3 to be their personal favorite. Spooky Swamp beckons next, and honestly, this usually goes as one of the more underwhelming stages for me, although I do think it has great vibes, even here in Reignited. I don't really understand why everyone in Spooky Swamp speaks in haiku, but it's certainly a design choice that sticks out, especially when one of the potential text prompt responses is you saying you're sick of it. That's pretty funny, and it's also a nice detail that both Moneybags and Sheila speak in them even though they aren't from this world. It's like some mystical literary aura that hangs over this place. The stage itself is decent, a mostly flat area to explore with a series of lanterns and treetops overhead that can be explored later on. There isn't much up here other than the candles you need to light, a key to open another lockbox, and an egg. I always forget too that the water itself here won't damage Spyro, but the piranhas will if you stay in for too long. It feels like the water itself should hurt you though, considering the game asked you to leap over it a few times. That lack of a bottomless pit makes it feel less challenging from a platforming perspective compared to the previous 2 stages. Maybe this level should have been placed first, swapping spots with Enchanted Towers as the first one you see upon entering Midday Gardens. Regardless, we have another set of egg challenges in front of us. The first sees us playing as Sheila in a minigame reminiscent to escorting the alchemist in Fracture Hills. We have to clear a path for him by kicking rocks and stomping mushrooms, but he moves pretty darn fast, and with a few obstacles in your way, it's hard to know which ones he'll crash into before it's too late. It creates another trial and error sequence which can be annoying. It's just funny because in that earlier interview, they talked about how they took some ideas from Ripto's Rage and tried to improve them here in Year of the Dragon to take those old ideas and make them even better. Well, this one's clearly borrowed from Spyro 2, and it somehow feels worse. It's also weird that the second challenge is actually a little easier considering the rocks don't respawn. It's also cool that this offshoot area contains more of those high up balconies with smashable walls like in previous Sheila stages. You always gotta be on your toes with the kangaroo, as that verticality can't go forgotten. If you focus just on the egg challenge, you'll miss out on a ton of gems. The other challenge revolves around a sleepy Rhinoc who must be blown up using bombs. You have to redirect them at the creature, sort of like you did in the Gulp boss fight. It's incredibly easy here, as this Rhinoc doesn't do anything other than spawn in 3 gators who attack you. You'd think as the fight goes on, he'd have more adds, but nope, he just sticks to the same pattern. I had to go back and check, but it was the same in the original game too. Not sure why the fight doesn't evolve much. Anyway, I do love this Rhinoc wearing the nightgown. It's a pretty funny change of pace considering we usually see them in armor or with weapons. It got me thinking about the enemy design in Year of the Dragon, and while I don't think it's quite as good as Ripto's Rage, it's still a solid improvement over the Norks in Spyro 1. Ripto's Rage had unique enemies in each stage, which added so much variety that it helped the worlds feel more alive. Year of the Dragon resorts back to the main antagonist having a huge army, the Rhinocs. However, I think this game does a better job of dressing them up in creative ways. Each stage features different looking Rhinocs, which adds visual consistency while still providing variation. There's the Ninjas of Fireworks Factory, the Safari whip-wielding variants in Molten Crater, the Winged Rhinocs of Cloud Spires, and Haunted Tombs mummy-inspired ones. So that it isn't just Rhinocs all the time. You have the Dinos in Dino Mines, the Gators of Spooky Swamp, the Octopi of Seashell Shore, and the Crabs of Lost Fleet, amongst others. While enemy AI and attack patterns hasn't changed too much from Spyro 2 to 3, I'd say the difficulty curve is better here, and the enemy design variation remains strong, providing cohesiveness, which is appreciated. The final main stage in Midday Gardens is Bamboo Terrace, a level that draws heavy inspiration from Spyro 2's approach to level progression. To move to new areas, you have to defeat enemies and save NPCs so that they can open a pathway for you, similar to Crystal Glacier and other stages. In fact, rescuing the NPCs even triggers a little cutscene showing how the pandas are opening up the next area. It makes me wish that Year of the Dragon's levels had gotten intro and exit cutscenes of their own, just like we saw in Ripto's Rage. It's amazing how much personality was interjected because of them. You got a real sense of the denizens' nature while also showing the problem they were currently facing, the issue you'd be helping to solve for them. Spyro 3 does have some cutscenes, but without the consistency, many of Year of the Dragon's NPCs and worlds don't feel quite as alive, especially considering there's no sister levels like in Ripto's Rage. The Forgotten Realms just don't feel as interconnected as a result. For what it's worth, I would have loved if Toys for Bob or Sanzaru had taken the initiative to design intro and exit cutscenes for Year of the Dragon. They could have shown a little creativity in this remake as they toiled away recreating what had come before. Those cutscenes could have been a little mark of their own, and I can't imagine that many fans would have hated them so long as they were crafted with the stage's spirit in mind. It ends up feeling like a real missed opportunity to me. Bamboo Terrace itself is another pretty flat level, a relatively straight line from point A to point B. It and Spooky Swamp have really faltered in that regard, not a lot of vertical movement. It almost feels like a dip in quality compared to Icy Peak and Enchanted Towers, and that may just be Insomniac's time crunch making its presence known, just like it kinda did with Molten Crater. However, one thing I do like about this stage is the water. Your attention isn't really drawn to it, but it contains gems that you have to nab, and even a secret area with 4 extra lives. It's a nice way of forcing the player to account for all of Spyro's moves. I also like that there's an egg just sitting slightly off the main path. A single leap and you can reach it. There's a few eggs like this throughout the stages, and I think that was a smart choice. With progression tied to them, it was smart to give the player a few freebies, especially with the kid demographic that they were going for. Not every player will be capable of tackling some of these minigames as easily as others, and so having a few easy eggs never hurts. It's also nice that another one is visible right from this location, cluing you in that there must be some high point to leap from. Besides the egg thief, the only other egg we can get for now is tied to the boat minigame. Our movement is locked and we're forced into the first person perspective using a fireball power-up to blast away at Rhinox before they reach the pandas. It's pretty simple, but I do remember struggling with this a little bit as a kid. Maybe the hitboxes have been expanded, I'm not sure. Either way, that's all we can do in Bamboo Terrace for now, as getting the final egg requires Bentley the Yeti. Before Spike, we have another set of Speedway challenges to tackle. This time, it's Country Speedway. Just like in Mushroom Speedway, we're told the optimal route to take to get all the objectives in Time Attack. I switched it up and took a different route just for the fun of it. The race is also a nice step up in challenge compared to the previous one. There's some really well-placed speed boosts that make you feel like a beast if you hit them all successfully. This one right after the first barn is really clutch in helping you win. It cuts a corner so heavily while giving you a ton of acceleration. You can't go wrong unless you miss a ring somewhere. And the Hunter Challenge this time, once again, takes us up to the skies, although this time we don't get a plane, but instead a jetpack. We're on a set path and use the firing reticle to aim at targets and take them out before country bumpkins get kidnapped. It's a fun little challenge. And while we're here, what's up with Spyro and barn levels? We have a completely metallic version in Robotica Farms, we have farm animals constantly showing up in all the speedways, and of course, there's a whole stage themed around this concept in Enter the Dragonfly. But as I said in my last video, we don't talk about Enter the Dragonfly. After a chat with the NPCs, the whirligig is ready for action. I do like that each hub world contains a different flying vehicle, the idea being that the level's denizens have all worked together to construct it to aid you in your fight against the Sorceress. If they just reused the hot air balloon, the characters would have nothing to build, and therefore no reason to exit their stage after Sunrise Spring. As we depart, we get another cutscene showing that Bianca is starting to feel more and more torn. She has dreams of becoming a sorceress, but she can't reach that goal unless she learns magic from her master, and there won't be any magic left if they lose control of the eggs. However, she just can't get behind the sorceress's violent ways. She's berated once more as we get a preview of Bentley the Yeti. From there, the sorceress creates Spike, who, does not look nearly as imposing or intimidating as he did in the original. Again, I'm trying to hold off until discussing all the NPC redesigns, but I'm not gonna lie, the boss designs are atrocious in this game. The fight with Spike itself used to be a lot better. He represented a real difficulty Spike with his 9 ticks of health. It was meant to be a sign that the player was wrapping up the simple times and that the game was about to take things up another notch. That's been undone here in Reignited, as now this creature only has 6 ticks of health instead of 9. Because Spike isn't very agile, and his projectiles are easy to dodge, it's incredibly easy to take him down quickly. With the smaller health pool, it feels like the awesome idea to bring back the power-up collectibles from Ripto's boss fight sort of goes to waste. It's over before you get to experiment with them too much. Now, you may have heard that and thought, wait, I remember Spike only having 6 health points in the original game too. Well, you aren't entirely mistaken. It's ode to a special system that was present in the original Year of the Dragon, but not here. It was called ATC, or Active Tuning Challenge, and we'll talk about it more in our next boss fight. For now, I'll just say this. The Spike fight in Reignited is a copy of the original game's easiest variation of the match. You aren't going crazy. As we arrive in Evening Lake, Bianca shows up once again with a much more direct warning. It's not a threat this time, it's a plea. She wants us to leave, trying to find a middle ground between her boss and these newcomers. She fears what the Sorceress will do to them, but still feels an attachment to her. She bargains with Spyro, promising to protect the rest of the eggs if they just turn around and go home. It's a nice shift in her attitude that helps convey the Sorceress's power, especially if her own apprentice is starting to fear her. With no intentions of backing down now, Spyro and Hunter carry on, despite the warnings of a looming trap. Spider Town is another Sparks level, and it's a solid step up in difficulty from the previous one. The spiders here chase you much more aggressively, and the boss itself has a long immunity phase until you deal with its underlings. The pressure these enemies put on you, paired with the abundance of power-up butterflies, does a great job of encouraging the player not to conserve the special ammo. Use it up because these enemies are tough and more power-ups await you. It's a good lesson that will only get more important the further we press into these level types. I also didn't connect the dots until reaching this stage, but a cool touch is that Sparks' button inputs for attacking are identical to Spyro's. He charges with square and shoots a fireball with circle. It's literally no different. It's great continuity from a design perspective, but also has a lot of character implications. These two are best buds, hanging out all the time, so it makes sense that the weaker Sparks would pick up on Spyro's fiery moves. Beating this stage in the original game rewarded the player with the Gem Finder, an extremely useful tool, especially here in Spyro 3. It allows Sparks to point in the direction of the nearest gem, which is helpful in locating the last few pesky ones. It's a strange walk back considering Ripto's Rage had this from the jump, but I guess it was necessary when brainstorming mechanical ideas for a character you don't play as most of the time. Here in Reignited, that Gem Finder ability is unlocked from the start, meaning this stage grants you with the wonderful reward of Diddly Squat. They really goofed on that one, didn't they? Evening Lake is like the autumn plains of Year of the Dragon. I can't explain it 100%, but it just feels right to say that. It is a top 3 hub world for me across the entire series, and perhaps in my top 10 levels overall. I'd have to think about it. It's just the vibes and the ambience, man. It's incredible. Let me say it this way. Evening Lake feels as close to our real world as is achievable in a Spyro game. There's something so nostalgic, comforting, and warming about sitting near a big body of water as the sun sets. The frogs croak in the background while crickets chirp away. The music for the stage is incredible too, containing mostly subtle notes as to fade into the background, not overshadowing too much. It's awesome. But the real treat lies under the surface. It's the only hub world in the original trilogy that goes all in on the swimming mechanic, as every level's portal is found under the water. It's an awesome touch. When you want to be at peace, you can just sit on the banks of the lake, soaking in the vibes, and when you're ready to get back to work, a forceful splash into the blue waters beckons you to new adventures. It borderline feels like 2 hub worlds in one, with completely different vibes. It's genius. Not to mention, the egg placements in this stage are incredible. Most of them are hidden behind breakable walls, accessed only after a glide, or best of all, inside the giant whale. It's such a clever hiding place as the whale itself feels completely out of nowhere. Such a massive creature doesn't belong here, despite the gentle vibes it grants to this already peaceful stage. It lures you in, and when it opens its mouth, it makes you think. Why would the animators make this thing capable of such a move? You get close and bam, you're swallowed whole, only to find an egg inside before it spits you back out. It's a legendary moment, one of the best in the entire series, at least to me. And by the way, I would love to hear your favorite moments in this game in the comments below. As for me, I purposely didn't include any other big topics to talk about during this stage simply because I want the strength of this hub world to stand on its own. It's a remarkable level, one that allows you to reflect on your adventure so far, because as the sun sets, the challenge is only going to get harder. The first thing to do here is rescue Bentley by paying Moneybags 1,000 gems. It's a steep price, but that's a good thing. It continues to encourage players to seek out these resources so they don't stall progression. It's nice to see that this stage rewards you with 600 gems, which is a decent return on the 1,000 you spend to get in. Those gems are relatively easy to recover too, because Bentley's Outpost is arguably the easiest stage in the entire game. It's hard not to feel like Bentley is kind of a stretch when looking at the new playable characters, as he controls nothing like the other two. Sheila expands on Spyro's moves by giving a mega jump, and Byrd takes it even farther by giving the player full, albeit clunky, flight. And then of course Agent 9 feels like the team taking a practice swing at shooting before they moved on to Ratchet and Clank. The monkey is a prototype for something new, not a dedicated extension of Spyro. But Bentley, he isn't like any of them. He isn't nimble and can't jump high, nor does he feel like a practice run for a studio whose direction was about to change. He's pretty slow, but he definitely feels lighter here than in the original game. I like him, but he's pretty boring to play as, given his immense strength carries the day without much challenge. Bentley's gimmick is might and force. He's able to use his club to smash up objects which would otherwise be indestructible to the other characters. This includes the heavy metal chest that Spyro is unable to charge through. This was a great idea to best convey Bentley's intended playstyle, destruction. What takes Spyro a power-up gate to open is done through sheer force by him. It communicates immediately to the player that this new critter is all about being strong. And it's a nice touch too that Bentley's personality seems to go against the dumb brute archetype he could have easily fallen into. In fact, they go the complete opposite way, having him use advanced lexicon while speaking. It shows he's well read and well studied, a fine fellow whose strength is matched by his smarts. Still, spamming his heavy attack is enough to get through the Rhinox, but he does have one other move, the deflective spin. He uses this to take out seals and clear paths for his brother Bartholomew. And to hammer home his strong presence, there's blocks he can push around to create new routes. This could be taken further in my opinion, but it wasn't expanded on much. In fact, it's hard not to feel like Bentley's Outpost is a bit of a dud compared to the other critter levels, as it lacks those offshoot pathways that the others have. I mean, sure, there is a random tunnel or two, but they're completely obvious and don't require any investigative effort to find. Maybe they were afraid adding too many optional areas would feel tedious given Bentley's slower speed, and maybe that's true, can't say for sure because it doesn't exist. What I do know is that, as it is now, Bentley's Outpost feels underbaked. Including the cutscene and load times, I 100% completed this stage in under 8 minutes. For reference, this was several minutes faster than Molten Crater and Bamboo Terrace, stages I haven't even 100% completed at this point. I like Bentley, but it does sort of feel like Insomniac was grasping at straws with this one. Our first Spyro stage in Evening Lake belongs to Frozen Altars, and may I just say, this may be one of the best stages in the entire series. The music is some of Copeland's best work, at least to me. The gimmick is executed very well, and hockey makes a comeback too. It all starts when you enter the stage and an ice fairy lets you know she's granted Spyro a special ability for as long as he stays within their world. I love that she doesn't immediately spoil what the ability is and that the player is left on their own to figure it out. Here in Frozen Altars, Spyro's Flame Breath is replaced with an Ice Breath that freezes enemies in place. It's the idea they briefly implemented into Cloud Temples back in Ripto's Rage, getting a full stage of its own, built from the ground up with this in mind. It's one of those ideas that you wouldn't really think too much about, but once it happens, you're like, duh, what a genius move. Running around, freezing enemies in giant ice blocks and smashing them up is just plain cool. Not to mention the enemies get another boost here, as the big Rhinox slam moves don't have nearly as much hesitation as they do in previous levels. Again, new hub world, increase the challenge, it's good design. It's also smart that the Ice Breath doesn't only provide something new, but opens up avenues to new challenges. For example, there's 2 giant snowmen in the level who have been brought to life. Spyro's Flame Breath would normally melt them instantly, but without it, he's gotta think on his feet. Using the new laser defense system, you make quick work of them. I mean, sure, the penguins tell you to do this, but it's still a decent switch up. There's also this platform that can only be reached by freezing an enemy and leaping on top of them to reach it. It's a miniature puzzle that I love. And then, when you reach the level's end, you aren't even done yet, as Frozen Altars has a whole gliding platform challenge baked right into the level design. You ascend to the upper parts of the buildings and must glide and hover between balconies to collect the rest of the gems and a few extra eggs. Even having completed this game fully years ago, I still had to take a few tries to find the full path for myself. It was nice, although I did make it harder on myself by forgetting I could just freeze enemies and use them as platforms to get to these areas as well. So yeah, overall, the main route of Frozen Altars is one of the best in the game. In fact, if we exclude challenge rooms, this might be the best base stage in the entire game, it's that good. Of course, we can't divorce the stage from its extra activities, and they're a 50-50 split between good and bad. Cat hockey is awesome. In that interview, Ted Price said he felt they improved hockey from Spyro 2, and he's right, not necessarily by changing the controls up too much, but by simply adding multiple pucks, cats this time around. It leads to more madness as you and the Rhinox scramble to get them into your goal, although being able to freeze the beast with your Ice Breath does grant a massive advantage. The other activity is a real dud though. On paper, boxing as Bentley sounds great given his affinity for power. Yet in practice, it's a stinker. The controls do not feel very responsive, it's hard to read the attack telegraphs of your opponent, and you have to complete the challenge twice to get the maximum number of eggs. Funny enough, many players reported this fight to be much harder in the Reignited trilogy, and I can't help but to agree. The lack of visual and audio feedback doesn't help, and after an attack, your opponent can launch a counter move faster than in the original. You really can't get caught up spamming attacks, instead, backpedaling and delivering a shot after he swings is the way to win the match. It doesn't feel like proper boxing in the slightest, just another thing you have to do to get all the eggs. Still, this blemish doesn't ruin what ends up being one of the best stages in Year of the Dragon. Next, let's head to Fireworks Factory, a level that, much like Skelos Badlands, Insomniac must have been really proud of because it featured in the main menu of the game. I've said it before, but I really do wish the Reignited trilogy contained those start screens. Anyway, it's not hard to see why Insomniac was so proud to feature this level right from the jump. It has a lot of great Spyro content, an aesthetic that feels bold compared to levels from the previous 2 games, a reference to previous games to acknowledge Spyro's history and success, and even a critter section emphasizing the new characters. In short, Fireworks Factory has it all. It all starts with Greta, who kicks off the stage by kicking Rhinox butt. It's cool too because it's not just for show, this guy drops a gem as she disposes of him. This happens later in the stage too. There's a few cutscenes in this stage, and it once again makes me wish this game had gotten proper intro and outro scenes. Anyway, the Rhinox here are interesting as they take a more defensive approach compared to normal enemies. The smaller ones will leap away if you mistime your attack, while other ones prefer to attack from a distance. They also are capable of respawning until you destroy the high up boxes that they stem from. And the big guys are covered in armor, meaning you have to get to their backside to light the fuse or use a firework to blow them up. This gives Spyro's spitting mechanic another usage, which is always appreciated. Again, this level is firing on all cylinders. It doesn't hurt that it's designed not to be one big circle, although you can reach the beginning from the end with relative ease. It's just nice to see some variation, especially after Frozen Altars, which, like many other stages, loops right back on itself. The base level is awesome, one of the best in the game, making for back-to-back bangers, but the challenge rooms are better than in the previous Icy realm. The first is such a cool idea to me, just make an enemy gauntlet for Spyro to go through. There's no gimmick, no vehicle, no critters, just Spyro and a path forward. It genuinely feels like the team acknowledging that the Purple Dragon's base moves are still fun to play with, no new ideas needed. In a game packed full of new playable characters and novel vehicle sections, it feels like the team reaffirming that Spyro platforming was always good enough on its own. The next challenge is Kick-Ass 2, the fight against the Twin Dragons. Anytime you see a power-up gate that gives you 2 powers at once, you know it's gonna be a good time. Unfortunately, this is one of the biggest differences between the original game and the remake, as this version of the challenge is much more tedious. The dragons' colors aren't as rich, making them blend into the darker environments more. Not to mention, they're capable of attacking you with more consistency, forcing you to farm butterflies to get back to full strength. It adds tedium, which does make this remade version feel a lot worse. However, I do like how strategic flying is rewarded, because chasing after them into tunnels will slow you down and give them more time to revive. Once you realize that staying outside of the tunnels is the key to winning, they go down without too much trouble. And as for our last challenge, well, it's locked too, until we free Agent 9. This is the last of 3 stages in the game where backtracking is mandatory if you want to complete it 100%, joining Molten Crater and Bamboo Terrace. However, it's easy to fall into traps that make it feel like there's more required backtracking in Year of the Dragon versus Ripto's Rage, quite literally in Hunter's case. After completing 3 levels in Evening Lake, you're shown a cutscene where Hunter hits a button and falls into a cell below. It's super quick too, blink and you'll miss it. Still, it represents a shift in stages going forward, as we will see. For now, what I'll say is that Lost Fleet and Honey Speedway can be completed 100% before Hunter is kidnapped, meaning his challenges don't require backtracking if you go out of the intended level order. You won't know that on a first playthrough though, which can add to the feeling that more backtracking is necessary in a lot more stages. A similar effect can be seen if you visit Sunny Villa before freeing Sheila, something I avoided on this playthrough. What I'll say here though is that the backtracking feels less intrusive than in Ripto's Rage, even though there's potential for more of it on a completionist run. That may seem paradoxical, but let me explain my reasoning. Backtracking in Ripto's Rage was tied to moves that Spyro unlocked for himself: swimming, climbing, and the head bash. In theory, Spyro was always capable of doing these moves himself, he just needed to be shown how. There's an argument here that Moneybags' lessons don't feel like lessons at all, since he never demonstrates them for us directly. It is a mechanical transaction, pay the tax, get the ability. Without some sort of visual lesson, Spyro's growth feels like a mechanical binary piece of coding. It lacks any story element that might enhance it. That isn't the case here in Year of the Dragon, as all of the backtracking is directly tied into the story, whether it be mandatory or optional. That's because Spyro is capable of gathering every gem and every egg that he's responsible for collecting from the very start. Backtracking is only tied to other characters, such as unlocking critters or because Hunter is kidnapped. And there's story implications for these reasons. Completing Sunny Villa, Molten Crater, Bamboo Terrace, and Fireworks Factory fully means Spyro has played the role of hero, freeing a trapped critter. Meanwhile, Hunter's stages become free to complete once he's freed from his prison, which we'll discuss more in the next stage. Regardless, by tying the backtracking into the story, it makes it feel more reasonable and gives the narrative some cause and effect and consequences, which is greatly appreciated. Backtracking doesn't feel so nebulous in Year of the Dragon. Lost Fleet is a level that earned a lot more of my appreciation while making this video, but some elements still baffle me. I originally viewed it as the weakest of the Evening Lake homeworlds, and while I still kinda do, it's a lot closer than before. It still has flaws, but I really do like it now. That's partly because this level feels like a wild mixing of mining towns and pirate ships, and it just somehow works. Crazy Ed and his band of moles are digging for treasure. It just happens to be in a destroyed fleet of pirate ships. It's of course more than that, but it's certainly one of the series' most novel aesthetics. The stage centers around two gimmicks, the big one being traversing the acid, and the other smaller one being the cannons. The cannons are a natural fit for a pirate level, and are used to progress through the main area, as well as to take out vultures for gems. However, the big deal here is the invincibility power-up gate that lets you traverse the harmful acid river for as long as it stays active. There's a whole network of tunnels that will require the player to backtrack to the power-up gate a few times to fully explore. It is a little bit of a pain to do that backtracking. I might be overlooking something, but I couldn't find an easy way back to the gate, meaning I had to run around the level several times to get my invincibility back. I swear I must have missed something though, because with seemingly every other level having a way to go back and forth between the start and end points easily, why not this one? If I didn't miss anything, then that's a huge knock on this stage, and I don't think I missed anything. I looked everywhere. Regardless though, swimming through the acid water is a lot of fun. There's a simple path, but also a ton of offshoots, even some containing a hidden egg that's hinted at from an earlier vista, and a back portion of the stage with a challenge room. It's awesome stuff. Although not being able to traverse this hill is really poor level design. Why not just make this a ledge you can't jump up? The hill makes you think you can walk up it, but no, you just slide down. That's always been questionable to me. I guess maybe you could say it's to prepare you for seeing the same thing in the skateboarding room, but that's a stretch. It doesn't damage the player, so what is there really to forewarn them about? Our first challenge room here revolves around an acid lake where we ride in a submarine using its advanced targeting to destroy Rhinox. Oddly enough, there's 2 egg challenges here, although you won't know the second one exists unless you talk to Crazy Ed a second time or check the guidebook. That's because after collecting Ethel, he doesn't pull you back in. This tricked me and I immediately used the power-up to get the gems of the lake, and then I left. I ended up having to go back to complete the second sub-challenge. This is crazy work considering this wasn't a problem in the original game, it's an oversight by Sanzaru. Still, swimming in the lake, having to balance revisits to the power-up gate with exploration is a really nice change of pace. The added pressure is real. As for our final egg challenge, it's inaccessible at the moment. That's because, like I was just talking about, Hunter is currently a prisoner of the Sorceress. His challenge in Honey Speedway is also locked off until he's saved. This was a really nice addition from the team because, once again, it gives weight to the story. These aren't just cutscenes playing that don't affect the gameplay loop. Hunter being kidnapped isn't some false threat, he's gone from the level. You will not find him until progressing the story. It gives some weight to the narrative, reflecting its twists and turns with a real gameplay consequence. Speaking of Hunter, when we leave this stage, we get another cutscene. It reaffirms everything we've been seeing so far. Hunter puts on a brave front to impress Bianca, and she brings him an apple, feeling guilty about his capture. Both of them are starting to realize that they aren't enemies but are on the same side. Bianca even almost backstabs the Sorceress by freeing Hunter, but can't bring herself to do it quite yet. We also learn that the Forgotten Realms were the original homelands for the dragons before they were expelled by the Sorceress. All the realm's magic slowly began to fade after that, forcing the egg kidnapping plan into motion. You know how I said that one challenge room in Fireworks Factory felt like the team acknowledging that Spyro is great on his own? Well, Charmed Ridge feels like a much bigger homage to the series' roots, showing a lot of love to Spyro 1 and 2 in its aesthetics and challenges respectively. The vibes are strictly fantasy, which harkens back to the levels of Spyro the Dragon, specifically Magic Crafters, and maybe even Dreamweavers a little bit, and the levels within them. There's cat witches, fairies, and castles galore. Hell, the cat wizards even grow and shrink Rhinox enemies, just like the wizards in Spyro 1's third hub world and its levels did. The story here is also cool, with the fairies urging you forward to save their princess from an evil warlock, only for the plot twist ending to reveal that she's in love with the bad boy. It's a Romeo and Juliet twist from an outsider's perspective. I always enjoyed that. More than any level so far, and perhaps in the entire game, Charmed Ridge tests you mentally with timing and puzzles. The cat witches control platforms that you'll have to traverse in rhythm to get past. This one in particular has always been enjoyable to me because you can sequence break it and fly backwards. Doing this means all the enemies here have their back turned on you, making it easier to take them out. It's super satisfying. There's also the hidden egg route, as I like to call it. You locate an egg in the distance, glide to it, but then have to take a step further by continuing to follow a path that isn't immediately obvious. Doing so will bring you face to face with another egg. Back on that same route, you have to use the Super Flame power-up to take out a metal crate, as well as these two cat wizards to get all the gems. It took a little more critical thinking to remember that on this run. It's genuinely these little micro moments that you have to just figure out for yourself. This translates well into the first challenge room, where you have to use beans returning from Ripto's Rage. Spyro can spit these out to create platforms of different heights. Using these, you can collect a few gems and make your way up to the Golden Goose, collecting 2 eggs in the process. The first handful of puzzles are really simple, but the last one does provide a nice challenge. You're given 3 beans and 3 patches of soil to plant them in. No matter what order you place them in, you can't reach the final balcony. You need another bounce mushroom. So far, beans haven't been used twice, but you'll have to backtrack and realize a mushroom bean from earlier can be swapped out with the flower bean and be carried forward to create the path you need. I remember getting so stumped on this the first time I 100% completed this game 14 years ago. I got the solution faster this time, but only through some mental gymnastics. The last challenge here is a forgettable Sergeant Byrd mission where you have to blast cat witches off their brooms. I remember this being a lot harder in the original game, as Byrd's stiff movement can prevent you from dodging attacks if you don't react quickly. However, here in Reignited, and maybe in the original too, I realized you can just spam rockets at the gate that they fly out of and hit most of them before the fight starts proper. Doing this makes the challenge a breeze. Asking the player to do it 3 times in a row to get the egg may be a little excessive though. Even with this less than stellar challenge, Charmed Ridge is still awesome. Its callbacks to previous games, like the fantasy theme of Magic Crafters and the Bean Challenge of Zephyr, are appreciated, and the NPC storyline has more oomph than most other stages. It's a level that gets you to use your brain, which is a good thing since Spyro can sometimes feel a little mindless with its simple platforming. Editor NopNapNarp here. The next set of lines was written before they announced Spyro A Realm Beyond, so bear with me because it's gonna sound a little cheesy hearing it now, but yeah, the point still remains true. Okay, back to the video. And just a random side note here, but if it's true that Toys for Bob is making a Spyro 4, I would love for them to reference Charm Ridge in a cool way. During the opening interaction, the fairy tells you that Azrael is from Felinia, a level we do not see in the original trilogy. It would be sick if that was a stage we go to in the upcoming game that plays in the same style as the original trilogy. It would be a great way for the company to present something new while tying it back to the classic works. With that, it's off to Honey Speedway for another time attack and racing challenge. I like that Sparks mentions that it's one of the only speedways that operates at night, and the skybox reflects it. The sun has gone down, and this is our last level in Evening Lake, meaning that nightfall is approaching. We don't quite have the darkness of midnight yet, but it makes for a nice little transition between those times of day. It's an easy to miss touch that I always appreciated. Either that, or I'm overthinking things. The challenges themselves aren't too bad. Getting all the collectibles isn't too hard, although you may slip up on one thing. When flying through all the honeycombs, you have to do a hard right cut out of the penultimate one, or else you'll get completely off track, at least if you're using the route that Sparks recommends. Racing the bees is about as tough as the previous race, so nothing to report there. And without hammering the point home again too much, it's nice that Hunter simply will not appear here to complete his trial until he's been freed from the Sorceress. With Evening Lake stages wrapped up, we begin our ascent to Midnight Mountain, but we're once again stopped for another boss fight. First, we see the breaking point between the Sorceress and Bianca as the former reveals her grand plan. Kill the dragons to harvest their wings and use them in a spell to achieve immortality. Just try to forget she's already been around for at least 1,000 years when she banished the dragons originally. Imagine living 1,000 years and being like, yeah, I'm gonna need some more of that. Is she on death's doorstep? I don't get it. It's a small detail, but it does make the world building fall apart for me. Either way, it's enough to get Bianca to turn on her, freeing Hunter after you defeat the monster to end all monsters, Scorch. Scorch is interesting, a giant flying creature that launches fireballs at Spyro and also spawns in creatures to attack you. You defeat him by collecting power-ups that Bentley provides, both missiles and rockets. It's fairly easy here in Reignited, especially on this run because he didn't spawn in Buzz, the first boss of the game. For what it's worth, I love that he does that. It shows you how far you've come. I guess I beat him too quickly here to see that happen though. Scorch, as well as both other bosses we faced already, have been a lot easier in Reignited versus their original counterparts, particularly the ones not named Buzz. That's because their versions here in Reignited aren't affected by a system called Active Tuning Challenge, or ATC, that was found in the original game. This was most likely a response to those who felt some of the challenges in Ripto's Rage were too hard, such as the lizards in Skelos Badlands or the trouble with the trolley. With ATC, the game automatically tracked players' skill level in the background, making notes of how often they died or failed challenges and altered upcoming content accordingly. If a player was doing well, things could be made harder through adding more enemies, decreasing the time available in timed challenges, and giving bosses more health. However, if a player was failing a challenge or dying a lot, the game would subtly tweak these factors to make them easier. It was essentially a dynamic difficulty that the player would never know about unless they really studied the game and took notice of small details. It acted as a way to give every player a challenging but surmountable experience, encouraging even more people to go for full completion. This was something I never knew about until doing research for this video, and I gotta say, to pull that off in the year 2000 is awesome. However, that system isn't present in the Reignited trilogy, as a standard immovable difficulty is placed across all playthroughs. That's probably why some challenges feel easier in the remake, because they probably default to the easiest mode. I'm sure detecting the differences and trigger points associated with ATC wasn't something Toys for Bob or Sanzaru could do, especially without the original code and the shortened development window for this final entry. So I'm willing to give them a pass for not including it, but it does feel like the team could have selected a better standard difficulty if there was only going to be one. Spike, in particular, is a copy of the original game's easiest version instead of being a middle ground. That's why he has less health than most players remember him having. You'd cruise through the first two hub worlds with relative ease, raising the difficulty through the ATC and making him a really tough fight. Here in Reignited, he and Scorch are much easier. In Scorch's case, his fireballs don't cover a large portion of the arena like they once did, making it far easier to dodge. I don't really have much else to say about ATC or this boss fight. I just can't help but to feel they could have given us harder versions of these iconic fights. As we enter Midnight Mountain, Bianca has a change of heart, vowing to help us stop the Sorceress as soon as we've gathered enough dragon eggs to confront her. But first, it's back to Evening Lake to complete Starfish Reef, our third Spark stage. I wanted to test something, so I went into the stage with Sparks at less than full health, just to see if that would translate into the level, but it doesn't. The level itself is a nice step up in difficulty, as it's really easy to get overwhelmed quickly, and the starfish that split into smaller enemies is a nice warm-up for the Manta Ray boss. After you deplete half its health, it'll split into two targets and get a bunch of adds that you have to ward off. It's not too bad so long as you charge away to create gaps before returning fire. With some perseverance, it'll go down just as easily as anything else in a Spark stage. After completing this level, Sparks gets an interesting power-up. He's now able to take 4 hits of damage instead of 3 before disappearing. This is a really solid reward, but I'm sure it put Insomniac in a pinch back in the day. Sparks has always been shown primarily as being yellow, at least at full health, so increasing his health further might have led to an interesting discussion. Should he be given a new color like he does when losing health? Ultimately, the team decided on no, which was the right choice for what it's worth. Instead of changing colors, he gets a brighter aura around him to signal he's at full health. It's basically sparkles. Either way, it's a nice reward. Not quite as good as the Gem Finder, but on par with the extra range granted after beating Crawdad Farm. Finally, we arrive in Midday Mountain, which, just like Evening Lake, is an incredibly peak location. I gushed about the former hub world, but this one might be even better. I guess it could go back and forth depending on the day, but man, this place feels incredible. The previous 3 hub worlds have felt homely. This place feels a little bit alien. The bottomless pits, dark colors, and winding paths give off a strange vibe, one that I can't help but to love. I used to spend a lot of time just running around this homeworld, knocking out the lizards, and looking for some way to glitch into this door because, as a kid, I could never reach the requirements. Funny enough, all of the levels in Midday Mountain are technically optional if you just want to fight the final boss. By collecting every egg up until this point, you'll already have enough to fight the Sorceress, sort of like how you could fight Ripto before finishing every level in Ripto's Rage. It's a nice touch, giving players more flexibility on the order they complete levels in. It's pretty nice. The eggs here are found with relative ease, but the egg thief can provide a challenge. I'm not grabbing all the gems here yet for a particular reason, but more on that later. For now, I wanted to take a second to gush about a design detail that was already good and continues to be great in the remake. That being that each portal has a structure around it that reflects the level's iconography. This has been true for every hub world up until now. Some of the earlier ones are better than others, but here in Midday Mountain, they all feel spectacular. There's the giant serpent on top of the haunted tomb, the gladiator mask of desert ruins, the lighthouse that makes up Harbor Speedway, and the crystals on... Hey, you mind here? Get the hell out of here. Yeah, the crystals on Crystal Ruins. Even Dino Mines is awesome. It looks cheap at first, but when you realize the stage is not just Western themed, but a parody of a Western movie set, the cheap wooden door frame makes more sense. These help to give the hub worlds more flair and personality, although I still feel like the stages themselves could have used better names. It's already time to free our last critter, Agent 9. I've really enjoyed these cutscenes, by the way, where Moneybags gets torched, and I also love the little detail of 9 reaching for his laser gun while still trapped in the cage. Not to mention, freeing Agent 9 is like a whirlwind because of the amount of energy the voice actor brings to the performance. Out of all the critters, the reignited version of the Space Monkey feels closest to the original in design and spirit. I really do like it. I wish they had all been recaptured this well. I'm just gonna come out and say it, I think Agent 9's stage is one of very few that might be improved in the remake. It might be better than the original, without losing sight of the point of the stage. In fact, it's like the only one I can think of at the current moment. It's like, yeah, Bentley's stage plays faster in Reignited, so it feels better, but the whole point of the character was to be slow, so something was kinda lost there. That's not the case with Agent 9's lab. It genuinely feels so much better to play through here than in the original. That's owed to the controls, which feel much more fluid here. He moves a bit faster and can swing that blaster's reticle around with a lot more ease. It has a much better flow to it that I really appreciate. Using his blaster and bombs to clear out the Rhinox and Byrds is enjoyed a lot more because of the power of modern hardware. A lot of the jank in the original is owed to the fact that Agent 9's gameplay was like a warm-up for what Insomniac planned to make next. They knew they were going to abandon Spyro, and with Ratchet & Clank and its shooter-heavy gameplay on the horizon, it was smart of them to dip their toes into the water. Obviously, Ratchet & Clank would go on to play and feel a lot better than Agent 9's level, but I like to think that this was an important step in their craft. It was proof of concept for the team, a way to start building momentum as they embarked on their PlayStation 2 adventure. And really, when looking at the critters as a whole, they best symbolize where the studio members were at the time of Spyro 3's development. Having exhausted all their core ideas for the Purple Dragon, the team wanted to try some new things while also preparing for the future. To me, it represents a transition point for Insomniac. It's them acknowledging that Spyro had run its course and they were starting to become creatively bankrupt for this particular series. So instead of dragging out the franchise, they gave him one last love letter and added a bunch of new playable characters to help the player avoid what the team was feeling: stagnation. While I'll always love Spyro gameplay, and I hope we get another title soon, I'll always respect the courage Insomniac had to move on from their successful franchise in pursuit of something new and exciting. For me, the critters best symbolize that feeling. Our first Spyro level in the mountains belongs to Crystal Islands. Much like Midnight Mountain, I think this stage was gorgeous in the original games, and it still looks just as good here in the Reignited version. I love that the gimmick is these cheesy magicians with terrible stage names that are just performing for you, and that's what allows you to progress to the level. I also think the crystal enemies are some of the best in the original trilogy. They looked awesome. And I think that makes for a good jumping off point to finally discuss the visual upgrades and downgrades afforded to Year of the Dragon here in the remake. I don't really want to overly harp on this since I touched on it heavily in the Ripto's Rage video, but there are a few things I want to point out despite largely feeling the same. For me personally, I always found the second game to be the most charming, mostly because of the goofy personalities of Ripto and Hunter, as well as the stage-specific NPCs. While Hunter's silly nature endures in Year of the Dragon, it's the second time we've seen this shtick, and as for the Sorceress, she's pretty inferior to Ripto, personality-wise. She's just evil, that's it, nothing more. So while I do think the remake lacks charm in the same way as the Ripto's Rage remake, I'm a little more forgiving of it here because it really feels like the gameplay variation took preference over fleshing out the world with unique characters when Insomniac made the game. In other words, Year of the Dragon just didn't have as much charm to lose. This is not only seen in the main story, where the Sorceress is boring, and Bianca is the only somewhat new interesting addition, but also in the worlds and their lack of cohesiveness. Again, there's no sister worlds in the Forgotten Realms, which leads a lot of the stages to feel cut off from one another. Overall, I don't mind some of the visual and voice actor changes here in the Year of the Dragon remake. With that being said, there's still plenty of character redesigns that I flat out don't like. I think they look worse than the originals by a large margin. Starting with stage-specific NPCs, I really despise the Tikis in Molten Crater, who have lost their stiffness, the hipsters of Enchanted Towers, who feel like a pop culture reference that will date this game heavily, and the panda of Bamboo Terrace, who just look goofy to me. Also, the iconic way the penguins talked in Frozen Altars has been lost. They don't quite capture the same mellowed out vibe. And as I already mentioned, the crazy maniacal laugh that the TNT creatures did in Icy Peak and in Scorch's Pit is not here anymore. Little details like that haven't been translated well into this remake, and it's a shame. There are some good ones though, like NPCs found in Charmed Ridge, Sunny Villa, Seashell Shore, and Lost Fleet. These, amongst others, maintain the original vibe. I think the critter redesigns are all over the place and easy to scrutinize simply because you spend a decent chunk of time playing as them. Agent 9 and Sergeant Byrd are probably the best ones, close to the originals in spirit and attitude. 9 especially still has a ton of that crazy energy, which is amazing. Bentley is alright, there wasn't much to adapt there, although his feet are a little bit uncanny. Bartholomew though, man, he looks terrible. Another top 5 awful design for me. But I think the worst of the main critters is Sheila. She was a simple kangaroo in the original, but they decided to dress her up here despite not doing the same to Bentley. Sheila's proportions also look incredibly off, as her top half is a twig compared to her bottom half that's thick as hell. Guess she never skips leg day, it's just off, I don't like it. Another big complaint that's unique to this game would be the redesign of the baby dragons. The eggs themselves look like cheap plastic, which sucks, and then when they hatch, you often get designs that lack the same personality found in the originals. I found myself nearly glossing over after watching the first couple of dozen eggs hatch because I knew I wasn't going to see anything new or exciting. They even reuse a ton of animations. I mean, we are rescuing the babies of Spyro species. It should feel better than just seeing a collectible go up by 1 count. And as I already talked about earlier, the redesigns of the bosses are also incredibly poor. They've lost all intimidation factor, it really sucks. But I will give a little credit where credit is due. Just like in the previous 2 games, it's undeniable that some of the extra level details do add to the ambience and setting, arguably improving on the original game in some ways. The stage we're in now immediately comes to mind, but it's also felt in Enchanted Towers, Charmed Ridge, and Fireworks Factory most, alongside of the Speedways and Sparks levels that do look a lot better. So yeah, overall, still a loss of charm and detail, despite some better looking levels. Anyway, back to the Crystal Islands themselves, and I think this is a beautiful level that ends up having the vibes and enemy design to carry it. No Rhinox is a nice touch considering the magician tells you that they're hiding from the Sorceress there. If her men were there, it would defeat that purpose. There's also a lot of bottomless pits, which signals another boost in difficulty now that we're in the final homeworld. The egg challenges are pretty forgettable though. Funny enough, the ones you find in the main stage end up being more notable. That's because 2 of them are found using a flight power-up. You track down an egg thief in a plane, which is a novel concept done well. Meanwhile, there's an egg you can only reach using flight. The power-up gate allows you to cruise through the stage and to see it from many different angles, something most stages don't afford you the opportunity to do. But like I said, the egg challenges are stinkers. I always forget that the slide even exists. I can only ever remember the one in Haunted Tomb because it's so much harder than this one if you want to get all the gems and survive to the bottom. Meanwhile, Bentley's Whack-A-Mole challenge is extremely tedious. It's somehow been made worse here in the remake. You're asked to knock out 20 moles in 1 minute. This would already be hard enough given Bentley's slow movement speed, but you also have to avoid hitting the other magicians or you automatically fail. They can pop up right underneath you mid-swing too, which is a real pain. I had to do this challenge like 7 times to complete it, which honestly felt like a relief. I was expecting to be here a lot longer, but eventually the RNG went in my favor. And that's what this challenge comes down to, RNG, especially when there is no ATC system. Next up is the Tomb Raider inspired Desert Ruins. They really weren't trying to hide the reference on this one, were they? Tara? Come on now, we see exactly what you're doing, Insomniac. It was all in good faith and fun though, so no worries. Speaking of Tara, and her design here in Reignited has certainly been, well, toned down, and honestly it's a change I'm okay with. The original design translated to modern day graphics would have had Rule 34 artists going wild. However, it does get me thinking about censorship in the Reignited trilogy. This is another subject I already touched on in the Ripto's Rage video, but essentially, many changes were made to designs and dialogue because of requests from the ESRB in order to achieve an E for everyone rating for the remake. It wasn't Toys for Bob's fault, but instead an executive order by Activision. I won't harp on it again, but I will say they made less changes here in Year of the Dragon. They mostly revolve around dialogue changes. Smelt the Seal's comment about Spyro being so purple was changed to "Dragons must have a lot of talent," probably to avoid some sort of racist implications. Bianca's first encounter also isn't as threatening, but most bizarre would be Hunter's change in Lost Fleet. He no longer talks about getting all the ladies when you beat him, but instead, he says he would still win a popularity contest. This one really baffles me. Getting all the ladies? It's just a man whose confidence is mixed with a little arrogance, not some malicious threat. Either way, the censorship here in Year of the Dragon isn't quite as heavy-handed. As for the Desert Ruins itself, it's a level that I always thought was just alright. I like the desert aesthetic, but it looks super plain even here in the remake. It kinda makes me think that the team was really starting to run out of time. And I feel the same way about the tomb that you pay money bags to get into. It doesn't look anything like an Egyptian tomb. It's way too nice in here for that. Although I will say it was smart of the team to remind the player of Moneybags a few more times here in Midnight Mountain levels. Paying him here makes his comeuppance to follow even more satisfying. And one last thing of note, this is certainly the most difficult stage in the game so far, as the scorpion enemies are capable of attacking you last second. It's really easy to rack up damage. The egg challenges of this stage are a bit of an afterthought for me personally. I completely forgot about the Hunter's Manta Ray challenge, which is another example of the team taking a previous idea and building on it like Ted Price said. Instead of just racing through rings, they instead gave the creature missile launchers and have you go to town on some Rhinox. There's plenty of gems to grab here too, which is cool, but it was always strange to me that there's this giant ocean subsection in a desert level. Meanwhile, Sheila's challenge is literally walking in a straight line and doing some old-fashioned 2D platforming, taking out scorpions and metal pot dudes. It's very simple and could have used a bit more challenge to make it stand out. Really, Desert Ruins is the most forgettable stage to me in Midnight Mountain and within the larger game. It just doesn't do enough to make it stand out for me personally. Really, the best part of it is gliding over the acid basins and traveling through the cave. I do enjoy that, but everything else just falls short. Only a few main levels left, and Haunted Tomb certainly fills the role of a late game stage. It's probably the toughest in the entire game, and maybe in the entire original trilogy. That's because it kicks things up by giving enemies more advantages than they previously had, but I'm not sure it's conveyed well enough to the player. Both the big and small mummies can only fully be defeated by picking up rocks thrown at you by the big guys and chucking them at enemies or the sarcophagi. It is notably harder, but I don't love the visual signaling of how to defeat these foes. They're wrapped up in paper, which certainly isn't the metal we're used to seeing from enemies who are immune to fire. Everything the games have taught us throughout the series dictates that these guys should perish to a flame attack, but they don't. And I don't think that change is conveyed very well to the player. It's a rare miss. At the same time, the falling boulder sections are easy to get stun locked in, taking more hits after failing once. It's also darker here in the remake, which makes it harder to see the shadow that warns you of danger. And while it isn't super relative to the difficulty discussion, the sound effects of the boulders falling aren't nearly as good as the original game. Not to mention, the slide, man, this thing was a killer as a kid. You have to turn super early from the right angle to nail this last turn. It's doable after a few attempts as an adult, but I remember struggling for hours with this part as a kid. For me, all of this combines to make Haunted Tomb the game's hardest stage. The challenge rooms would have added to this if we were playing the original game, but only in the case of the hovercraft competition. Spyro must use a vehicle to blow up Rhinox before they get him. It's been made easier here in the remake. That's owed to the enemies who don't shoot you from multiple angles at a time. They're quite content to wait for you to get super close and only attack Spyro one at a time. It can still be tricky, but not nearly as hard. And to be honest, I think that's a good thing. Getting shot from off-camera angles and taking damage does not feel fair. As for the other challenge room in this stage, it belongs to Agent 9. And my lord, maybe it's because I haven't played this game in years, but for the life of me, I could not remember what this challenge was as I entered the portal. Even while doing it, the memory is still pretty hazy. It's an overhead shooter section where you blast a bunch of enemies and avoid dying, that's about it. It's really not hard, but again, the overhead view, along with the first-person view in Dino Mines and Fireworks Factory, makes me think they were experimenting as much as they could with as many different setups as they could before building Ratchet & Clank. Overall, Haunted Tomb is a perfectly serviceable late-game stage, although I do think some of its difficulty is artificially produced. And one little piece of trivia I did want to note here is that this level and Frozen Altars are the only ones in the entire game where gems are only found in the main stage. None reside in the challenge rooms. I just thought that was interesting. But speaking of collectibles, I did want to comment on another observation. Collecting in this game has a curve, just like difficulty, at least when it comes to gems. Every time you enter a new homeworld, the amount of gems in each stage increases. The stages in Sunrise Spring have 400, Midday Gardens levels have 500, 600 in Evening Lake, and 700 here in Midnight Mountain. While the process of collecting gems never gets harder, you just pick them up, it's pretty cool that there's a sense of progression and reward to it. And this can of course be manipulated by the dev team, using gems worth a higher total, like yellows and purples, more frequently to create the illusion of there being more physical ones to pick up. However, this still creates a powerful sense of reward for the player. Yellow and especially purple gems start out at a premium. You don't stumble into them as often as you do the blue, red, and green ones. However, here in the game's last homeworld, you find them at a more frequent rate. The game has taught you to view these gems as something special, and now they're given out at a greater rate, which feels good as a player. It's a little thing, but it's something that Year of the Dragon handles very well. I don't know what it is about Dino Mines, but it's always felt like the most rushed level in this game. The simple level design might be the culprit, as the emphasis here is on tough enemies, not necessarily traversing or exploring. Sure, there are some elements related to that, in particular this cheeky hidden egg right at the level start. However, the main draw of this stage is the difficult dinos who can wipe you out quickly if you aren't careful. So many Spyro enemies can be dealt with simply by sprinting at them or getting close enough for a flame attack. That's been true across the series, however, I think Year of the Dragon has the best difficulty curve, as it starts out as easy as any other, but continuously gets more challenging as you progress, even surpassing what was seen in the latter stages of Ripto's Rage. That's felt heavily here in Dino Mines, as well as in Haunted Tomb. However, that's really all there is to this stage, a bunch of tough enemies who are stacked in close proximity to one another. No part of the main pathway asks you to glide at all, which seems criminal considering this is the last stage of the game. It always gave me the impression that Insomniac, once again, was running out of time. The challenge rooms here are a great example of how Sanzaro and Toys for Bob certainly made some of the challenges a lot easier in the Reignited trilogy, something I talked about previously in the Ripto's Rage video, and again, it probably relates to ATC here. Shooting all the Bailey gang, and especially swimming through the tunnel, were really tough challenges that took a few attempts for casual players in the original game. Now, I can beat both challenges very easily. Again, part of that could be increased skill by being older, but it's probably also owed to the better technology. The targeting reticle, as well as Spyro's swimming controls, are smoother here. Your inputs aren't as janky, and it makes things a breeze. Like I said, I'm once again reminded of the active tuning challenge that's not found in the Reignited version. With so many different modes of play in Year of the Dragon, it almost seems criminal not to include it. Having it in the remake would restore dynamic difficulty and lead to an overall more balanced player experience. Again, I can understand why it's not here, but I do wish it was. With how it is now, challenges that were once a struggle seem a lot easier. Same goes for many bosses. And yet, some challenges like the Whack-A-Mole minigame and Twin Fire Dragons are harder than ever. When people say that these remakes didn't quite capture the same gameplay feel, I think that's what they're alluding to, at least here in Year of the Dragon. Outside of that, I don't have much more to add about Dino Mines. It's one of my least favorite stages across the series because it seems so half-baked and the challenge rooms whooped me as a kid. Really, the only thing I'm left wondering is, where do the NPCs in the Midnight Mountain stages go when they take the exit portals? The other ones help to build vehicles that you use to travel between homeworlds, but these guys just vanish. I'm not sure why they even leave. Our last pit stop before the Sorceress brings us to Harbor Speedway. I gotta admit, I'm glad this is the last Speedway I have to write about for one of these videos. They're fine, but they all just feel sorta similar. You can lump them all together. One thing I will note though, having played all of these games within a shorter time period of each other than before, the ones in Year of the Dragon do feel the easiest, at least in regards to the time attacks. That's true once again here in Harbor Speedway. And the race against the Byrds isn't too hard either. Playing as Hunter as he moves through the smoke rings can be tricky if the saucer jukes you out, but it's really not that rough at all. All in all, the speedways are a decent distraction, but not my cup of tea. I'll do them for full completion, and then never come back to them. I'll respect Insomniac for this though. They made sure that each new game introduced something new into these stages, which does help them feel like a part of the game that they cared about just as much as the normal stages. With that nice sentiment out of the way, goodbye Speedways, I will not miss you. And with that done, we're ready to confront the Sorceress. This fight blows my mind for two reasons. First of all, the lack of a story beat within it, and second, the lack of spectacle overall. It's so utterly bizarre that the game uses story cutscenes to weave a tale around Bianca as she goes from a deceived pawn to a hero. We watch as she comes to terms with the Sorceress's evil nature and betrays her by freeing Hunter, actually falling in love with him along the way. She starts off super antagonistic towards Spyro and Hunter, but that loosens as you move to the different hub worlds. You have all of those scenes demonstrating that arc and cementing the Sorceress as a vile threat. And then, when Spyro shows up to confront her, there's no words, no dialogue, no exchange, no nothing. Hell, even Agent 9 can barely get a sentence out before the fight begins. I understand that Spyro has viewed the Sorceress as not much more than a speed bump in this journey, focusing mostly on saving the eggs rather than stopping her. I also get that the story has focused more on the connection between Bianca and Hunter. Still, to not have one iota of dialogue between the two throughout the entire game is certainly a strange choice, one that undermines the entirety of the storytelling that came before it. Spyro ends up being an afterthought in the story despite his name being on the box. It almost makes me feel like, yeah, Insomniac was really ready to be done with the dragon. And on top of that, this is a poorly recreated version of the original boss fight, at least aesthetically. Mechanically, it's similar enough, but there's something so uncanny about the way the Sorceress moves here. Not to mention, the sound effects aren't nearly as good. In the OG, she felt at least a little bit intimidating, but here, it feels like a Karen chasing after you when you snark at her for asking to speak to the manager. There's no presence to her, and I can't stand the redesign. I think it's horrendous. The fight itself revolves around jumping onto vehicles and using their cannons to blow her up. That's it. The flying saucer in particular seems completely out of left field. The fight itself just doesn't hold much weight or stakes, unlike when you fought against Ripto. In that game, he and Spyro took turns bantering with one another, building up the drama, and without that background, the fight here feels like a big fat nothing. You just do it because, well, it's the final boss. Even the ending doesn't leave much room for spectacle. You get a cutscene of her falling into the lava, only to see a hand emerge from it later, hinting at a second fight. You may be thinking, oh, well, then the second fight will make up for this one, but in actuality, it doesn't. It has the same level of interactivity between the two characters. None. And even if it did, how many players are actually going to see it since that fight is locked behind full completion? Struggle with even just a single challenge room as a kid, and you will never get into the super bonus world to know that the second fight even exists. Ultimately, the fight with the Sorceress is a total disappointment if you ask me. After her defeat, we go back to more cutscenes showing Spyro searching for Hunter. We get little vignette moments that allow Spyro and the critters to interact one final time, and there's even a guest appearance from Alora who joins alongside the professor who appeared in Agent 9's lab. Spyro eventually tracks down Hunter, only to see him and Bianca embrace in a kiss. After a sarcastic comment about falling in love, Spyro and Alora sit back and watch the fireworks with one another as the credits roll. Despite not liking the lack of a cutscene before the Sorceress fight, I really do appreciate these ones. Insomniac knew it was their final adventure with Spyro, so why not give him a few feel-good moments while bringing back some of the past characters? It's good to see them again, and it's a nice send-off for the Purple Dragon. But we're not done yet. There's still a few more things to do before reaching full completion. First up, we have our final Sparks level, Bugbot Factory. This is a really good final challenge for the Dragonfly. There's just as many enemies as before, but they've elevated the difficulty by having the object that spawns enemies also being an enemy. They're capable of scurrying away, and you gotta get to them to finish their onslaught. These key-holding crabs take a similar approach to defeat. You have to continuously blast them to keep them away from the key and grab it, which eventually kills them. And the final boss of this stage is capable of splitting into two enemies, but admittedly it does feel easier than previous fights. The reward for defeating this stage is twofold, at least in the original game. First, it gave you the ability to warp to any stage you want to from the guidebook, but this is a feature that's granted from the opening moments in the Reignited trilogy. However, the second power-up is much more interesting. Sparks will break gem containers for you while simultaneously grabbing up gems. And before this playthrough, I don't think I ever saw this as a kid or as an adult. When I was young, I had no interest in playing as Sparks, and as an adult, I was 100% completing levels as I went. On this playthrough, I purposely let some containers alone in Midnight Mountain and Lost Fleet, and what do you know, Sparks really does smash them up. It's a small thing that I've never seen before, but I love it. As I said before, it's always cool to learn something about one of your favorite gaming franchises that you just never knew before, or at least saw it in this case. To get into the Super Bonus world, we'll have to do some backtracking to finish up all the previous levels that we couldn't before. This involves pit stops in Molten Crater, Bamboo Terrace, Lost Fleet, Honey Speedway, and Fireworks Factory, so let's touch on the stuff we missed on our first go-around. Before departing the mountain, it's quite easy to notice Moneybags standing in the middle of this bridge. In one of the series' best moments, you're permitted to get revenge on the bear for his taxation over the last two games. You'll earn those gems back by chasing him down and attacking him in one of the most cathartic sequences in all of gaming. This isn't like a one and done either, where you attack him once and he drops all the goods. No, you get to go multiple rounds with this dude, making sure every burn scorches and every head ram bruises. It's a great sequence, especially after beating the Sorceress. He even has a dragon egg that he drops after you hit him enough times, which is the cherry on top. It gives you a good reason for attacking him. Anyway, back to our other levels. First up is Molten Crater, where we play as Sergeant Byrd, using his flight to pick up tiki heads and drop them back onto their respective bodies. It's not too hard with a bit of patience, and there's even a hidden egg behind a breakable wall, although it isn't too hard to miss. This is a pretty standard Sergeant Byrd section. Next up is Bamboo Terrace, where Bentley must ascend a mountain to recover a dragon egg. Despite the simplicity, this is one of my favorite challenge rooms in the entire game. The aesthetic is really nice, and I love how it's a callback to Nork Cove from Spyro 1. It all blends together well to make for a nice little challenge, although I think it's dumb how Bentley can't make some of these jumps towards the end of the run. After that, it's off to Lost Fleet for some skateboarding. Hunter was previously locked up, but now that he's back, we can take on the Rhinox in a skating competition before defeating the cheetah himself. It's hard not to feel like the controls in this skate park aren't as fine-tuned, but that's owed to the setup of the track. Trying to maximize tricks to receive more boost can actually slow you down. Performing tricks leads to slowed speeds, which can see you landing in acid pits or reversing course. Again, it's not too hard to overcome, but it is a nice step up in challenge from the last two parks. In Fireworks Factory, we play as Agent 9 in another first-person shooter section, although we're free to move around for ourselves, unlike in Dino Mines. This makes the challenge a lot easier because you're free to make spatial adjustments to dodge Rhinox. Not to mention, many of them have super delayed attacks, so as long as you keep blasting, you'll be fine. This is another challenge that's been made easier in Reignited. And finally, it's off to Honey Speedway to complete Hunter's task. Much like the other jobs where we play as him, we control a vehicle, this time a boat. We navigate the Honey River, leaping over obstacles until the UFO chasing us crashes and we get a dragon egg. It's pretty lackluster. But with that complete, along with the rest of the gems gathered up in the respective challenge rooms, we've now reached 111% completion, and that unlocks the Super Bonus round, so let's head there now. Without question, the Super Bonus round is the best 100% completion area across the original trilogy. Nasty's loot was similar conceptually, but smaller in comparison. And as for Dragon Shores, well, it always felt unremarkable to me. This feels like a proper reward. A fleshed out area with 5 distinct challenges, including chasing down gem thieves, a submarine challenge, another skateboarding race, an awesome flight section, and a final confrontation with the Sorceress. After Bianca's welcoming, chasing down the gem thieves is a ton of fun. There's a childlike joy that comes from finally running one of these guys down, and being rewarded so many gems in a quick burst feels ultra satisfying. The submarine challenge is just alright though. It feels like it's ripped straight out of Lost Fleet, especially with the similar level design. It's the most forgettable section of this bonus. But we come back with a banger in the skating course. I will admit, it was never the game's most well-built course, as it's easy to fall off, get reversed, or just randomly get blown up by the Yeti racers. Still, there is an internal satisfaction from racing this course well, overcoming its difficulties, and putting together a solid race. What really stands out here is the reward for winning, the massive treasure chest that is packed to the brim with gems. The way they shoot out of here, man, it's hard not to feel on top of the world. After that, we use a double power-up gate to track down some more flying sheep. Nothing too crazy, but a nice homage to the Metropolis level in Ripto's Rage. But once again, my biggest problem with the super bonus round is our second fight with the Sorceress. After not seeing any confrontation or dialogue between her and Spyro during their first bout, it seems natural to wander into this arena expecting to get it here. It's like, oh, they were saving it for this moment, but no. It's just Bianca telling us how the fight will function mechanically, and it's once again off to the races. No interaction whatsoever. I kinda think they're suggesting that Spyro, as well as his friends, have no real worries that he'll defeat the Sorceress with ease. I get this impression because of the dialogue Hunter and Bianca give us here in the super bonus round. Hunter talks about how Bianca was nervous when he went to fight the Sorceress, but him, being Spyro's best friend, he wasn't concerned in the slightest. In fact, he laughed off Bianca's concerns and got to work fixing up the submarine. He was so unbothered by the confrontation, maybe Spyro was too. No need for words, just get the job done. That's probably a stretch, but it gives me a little bit of peace of mind. Overall though, the super bonus round is such a step up compared to Spyro 1 and 2. It feels meaty and substantial in comparison. As if the developers wanted to make sure they sent the purple dragon off the right way and by rewarding players who did everything, especially considering this game has way more collectibles than the previous two games. After putting in all that work, finding a measly offering would have been disappointing, but this feels a lot better. Back when I made the Spyro the Dragon video, I was like, oh yeah, let me just grab all the skill points. It won't take super long, and it'll give me comfort knowing I did literally everything in the game. That continued into the Ripto's Rage video, but Year of the Dragon takes things to another level. Granted, nothing here is terribly hard, but it may take you a few tries to gather each one instead of getting them all straight away. Some are simple, like pushing this box off the edge as Bentley, swimming up the dark hole in Haunted Tomb, and blowing up the seaweed in Desert Ruins. However, some are a bit more tedious, like blowing up the gophers in Sergeant Byrd's level, destroying the palm trees as Agent 9, gliding to the impossible tower in Charm Ridge, or landing this glide in Icy Peak. Again, nothing too crazy, but a noticeable step up compared to the previous games. There's two main stinkers though. The first is hitting all the seahorses in Dino Mines, which will take you a few tries, especially this devious one who has a TNT crate right behind him. That's a bit unfair, but it's not nearly as bad as beating the Yeti in 2 rounds in Frozen Altars. The controls for this were already so wonky, and to add a time limit to it created a total chore. However, there are some good ones too. For me, they take the form of the skateboarding challenges, which I do really enjoy completing. Racking up points in the skate parks, especially in Enchanted Towers, is something I used to do even in my free time just for the love of the game. And completing the race quickly in Lost Fleet was a nice challenge that took me a few attempts. However, out of all of these, my favorite on this playthrough was discovering the power-up during Agent 9's section of Fireworks Factory. I had no idea this even existed, and say it with me once more, discovering new things about my favorite older games is always a blast. Just like in the last 2 games, getting all the skill points unlocks an art gallery showing off artwork created during the making of the Reignited trilogy. In the original game, it unlocked an epilogue where you got to see what happened next for a bunch of the characters. I would have honestly preferred they kept that, but it is what it is. But with everything collected, we've now fully completed this save file for Year of the Dragon, so there's nothing left to do but to bring this video home. Despite how much work Insomniac put into the original Year of the Dragon to make it their magnum opus of the series, I still find myself enjoying the other two games more. That comes down to the focus of the gameplay being diluted here. Playing only as Spyros did wonders for the first two games, and the world building felt even stronger there than it does here. Spyro 3 is by no means bad. In fact, I do enjoy some of the alternate game modes like playing as Agent 9 and skateboarding, but overall, this third entry is filled to the brim with challenges that get away from the core Spyro platforming loop. Between the critters, Hunter, vehicles, and sparks, you spend a lot of time not playing as Spyro in a game that features his name in the title. Again, it's by no means bad, but that gameplay clarity allows for the other two games to shine brighter for me personally, but I could see how people feel differently. With that being said, it's hard not to be impressed with what Insomniac managed to craft in just a few short months between the releases of Spyro 2 and 3. Not only did they have to build entirely new worlds, but they also had to design and implement new characters and vehicles while also settling on a story direction that they felt comfortable with. A lot of work must have been done very quickly, but I'm sure the experience building the previous two games proved very fruitful. And despite it being my least favorite game in the original trilogy, it's still a slam dunk game that I would recommend anyone to play. I just wouldn't call it a great starting point for the franchise because it is a little disjointed. When it comes to this remade version, even 8 years later, it's not hard to see the rift between what Toys for Bob made and what they simply oversaw in this third game. At launch, Spyro 3 Reignited was plagued with bugs and glitches, lacking the same polish of the first two remakes. It wasn't a great look for an already struggling Sanzaru. Still, the remake is serviceable, and while I don't think it has as much charm or visual flair as the previous two games, I would say the same about the original release. And that really represents my biggest gripe with Year of the Dragon. It has moments of fading charm, but overall it lacks the same quality level of world building that made Spyro 1 and 2 special. It just feels like something's missing. The NPCs and realms don't intermingle like they once did, and despite a bigger emphasis on the story, it ends up falling flat as Spyro is an afterthought within it. And gameplay-wise, when you're playing as Spyro, running around torching Rhinox and gathering gems and eggs, it's a treat. But the game so often gets away from these moments, and while the critters and vehicles aren't necessarily bad, in fact they're mostly decent or good, I'll still lament the time taken away from the Purple Dragon. It's still a damn fine adventure, but it's one that rings just a little bit hollow compared to what came before. Thanks for watching. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this look at Year of the Dragon. Now that we're here, it's complete. I've finished my look at the original trilogy of Spyro games. It's clear to me that, while Sly still dominates my channel's analytics, there's still a lot of Spyro fans here as well. Perhaps those two even cross over for some of you like they do for me. If this video does as well as the other two, I'd love to eventually make a video ranking all the missions in the original Spyro trilogy from worst to best, much like I did with the Sly Cooper missions. Maybe that would be a nice reward for hitting 4,000 channel subs, or maybe even less, like 3,500 or something. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this series of videos, taking the time to hit the subscribe button goes a long way in helping this channel grow and to become more accessible for others. Even if my username rots away in your sub box, it's still a great aid. If you want to further support this work, you can consider donating via Super Thanks, using my Buy Me a Coffee page, or simply becoming a channel member for $1 a month. Any extra support means the world to me, but if you don't want to donate, that's fine too. I still thank you simply for watching my channel and sticking through the entire video. With Sly and Spyro wrapped up, I have a lot of choices for what old gaming franchise to pivot towards next. I'm considering Crash, but my heart really wants to cover the original God of War trilogy first. Time will tell, but those are the leading candidates for now. Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank are possibilities too. What would you like to see next? Let me know in the comments below as well. And of course, yes, I will obviously be covering Spyro A Realm Beyond when it releases in 2027, no doubt about it. So anyway, as I always say, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, donate if you want to, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.